Chapter 909. Eric, I haven't seen you in a while. You've been doing well recently. I've been hearing your name every day in San Francisco. Larry Ellison greeted him as soon as he walked into the restaurant. He gave Eric a warm hug. Eric let go of the unshaven Larry Ellison and smiled. You've been doing well too. I heard that you've raised a large sum of money recently. What are you planning to do? Hey Eric. Larry Ellison brought Eric to a seat and couldn't wait to explain. You must have heard some random gossip. Look, I rushed over from San Francisco as soon as you called. If I didn't call you, you would have bought Apple before coming to see me, right? Eric said sarcastically. He took the menu from the waiter and looked at it. Misunderstanding. This must be a misunderstanding. Larry Ellison immediately denied. I had to take care of the company and fly back and forth between the East and West Coasts. That's why I neglected you. Eric ordered a dinner and closed the menu. He looked up at Larry Ellison and smiled. If you're really busy, I can understand. I heard that the competition between Oracle and Informix has been very fierce recently. Have they removed the billboard they set up outside the Oracle building? In Eric's original memories, Oracle was basically in a state where it was the dominant force. But now, Oracle was far from Microsoft's position in the desktop operating system market. In North America, there were two database software companies that were comparable to Oracle. They were Informix and Sybase. Sybase also operated a server business in addition to database software. Like Oracle, Informix focused on the database software market. The competition between the two was extremely fierce. Informix even bought a billboard outside the Oracle headquarters with the slogan, "A dinosaur crawled here." Eric didn't know what this was about, but he knew that it was definitely not something good. Recently, seeing that the funds raised were enough to buy Apple, Larry Ellison did have the idea of leaving Firefly and buying Apple alone. In addition to the encouragement of his friend Steve Jobs, he also knew that if Firefly was involved, even if it only held 10% of the shares, it would have as much say as he, the founder of the acquisition. If he could get rid of Firefly, the control of Apple would be completely in his and Steve Jobs' hands after the acquisition. However, Eric's words made Larry Ellison's hair stand on end. Of course, he wasn't stupid enough to think that Eric was just teasing him when he mentioned Informix's billboard. Under Firefly investments, whether it was Yahoo, AOL, or the recently rising Amazon, they were all super big customers that any database software company had to fight for. What's more, Yahoo also controlled the Yahoo Technology Alliance, which had become the rule maker on the internet. This kind of influence could not be underestimated. Eric mentioned Informix on purpose. The warning could not be more obvious. Now was the most critical moment in the competition between Oracle and Informix. If all of Firefly's internet companies were to side with Informix, the originally evenly matched situation between the two database companies would immediately be broken. Database software companies and operating system software companies were actually similar in some aspects. If the two sides widened the gap, due to the influence of the Matthew effect, the advantage of the leading party would only become more and more obvious. The result of the lagging party was obvious from the current situation of Apple Computer. Larry Ellison was a very arrogant person, which was known by the entire Silicon Valley. However, he was definitely not the kind of person who would show his arrogance in front of anyone. Otherwise, Oracle wouldn't have developed to its current scale. At this time, in front of this young man, he had lost all of his arrogance. He even had a sense of powerlessness, as if his fate was in the hands of this young man. Larry Ellison raised his hand and touched his forehead. He didn't dare to be perfunctory anymore. He said seriously, "Eric, okay, this is my fault. However, now that the acquisition negotiations have just begun, I promise that I won't hide anything from Firefly. If you're worried, you can send someone to join the negotiation team." Eric shrugged and said, "Larry, I've said before that I'm not interested in acquiring Apple. I just think that Jobs is a very interesting guy, so I'm involved in this matter. After the acquisition is completed, I won't interfere with the management of Apple. This will be an ordinary equity investment. But if you dare to trick me, I don't mind putting this rotten apple on top of your Oracle." "Eric, don't worry, this will never happen again." Larry Ellison felt that there was something wrong with the grammar of Eric's last sentence, but he didn't point it out. He just realized that Eric didn't intend to hold on to this matter, so he grinned and agreed. Eric glanced at this guy and suddenly realized that to be friends with Jobs, these two guys had something in common, which was that they were both assholes. Eric suddenly had some thoughts in his mind, and he said, "Larry, you don't think this is over, right?" This Eric. What else do you want?" Larry Ellison, who had already relaxed, became vigilant again. Eric didn't want to talk nonsense with this guy. He said, "Do you know that Firefly has been preparing for Iron Man recently?" Larry Ellison froze for a moment and realized something. He said excitedly, "Eric, you want me to play Tony Stark?" "No problem, absolutely no problem. I also think I'm quite suitable. Well, we can discuss the pay." Eric glanced around and didn't find a suitable guy to knock on the hairy face opposite him. He could only say in annoyance, "There's no Tony Stark. Do you want to be Tony Stark's driver?" "Don't do that, Eric. Even if you want me to play the villain, I'll lose face as a driver." Larry Ellison seemed to have suddenly gone crazy and started to bargain. "Okay, then I'll be the driver. I'll get someone to inform you of the shooting schedule." Eric knocked on the table and made a decision. Larry Ellison thought that Eric was going to say something that would catch him off guard. When he heard that it was just a guest role in a movie, he didn't have any scruples and nodded in agreement. He even deliberately made a few jokes. However, Eric obviously wasn't done. He continued, "However, that's not what I was talking about. Iron Man is a sci-fi movie. It's very suitable for technology companies to implant it. So Oracle should also participate. I'll charge you $5 million for the implant." Larry Ellison's face immediately turned sour. Oracle's annual advertising budget was less than $100 million. $5 million for a movie was a huge number. "Eric, this is extortion. Can you give me a discount? How about $500,000? Yahoo plans to build a large data center on the East and West Coasts and in Europe next year. I can consider giving the database software order for these projects to Informix. $3 million. Eric, you have to know that as a CEO, my decisions have to be approved by the board of directors. $3 million is the most I can promise. Amazon will be listed at the end of the year. They will definitely need to expand their infrastructure. As an e-commerce company, database software." Larry Ellison slammed the table and interrupted Eric. $5 million. Deal. Oh, and I'll charge you $1 for the guest role as Tony Stark's driver. Hollywood doesn't allow people to work for free. However, you have to sign 3 contracts first. Larry Ellison's face fell and he nodded. "Okay." Eric nodded with satisfaction and added, "Also, this meal is on you." He didn't hesitate to extort a sum of money from Larry Ellison as a punishment for trying to trick him. After dinner, Eric wanted to return to the Sharp Corner Manor. The girl called to say that the roles in Fast and Furious had been settled. Eric asked the driver to drive to Beverly Hills. When he arrived at the girl's mansion in Trussdale Manor, Eric found that Gwyneth Paltrow was also there. Holding Eric's arm, the girl sat down on the couch and said, "Eric, Kate is very interested in the role of Dominic's sister Mia. What do you think?" In the original version, the role of the male lead sister had been played by Jordana Brewster. Eric remembered that the Latina girl's appearance when she was young could be described as perfect. However, for some reason, her shelf life was so short that she didn't look as good after she turned 20. As this thought flashed through his mind, Eric looked at Gwyneth Paltrow. Due to the changes in Hollywood history, even if Shakespeare's Love hadn't been filmed yet, it definitely wouldn't be easy for Gwyneth Paltrow to become a movie queen again. However, she was a second-generation heiress in Hollywood after all. Eric was very curious why she was interested in a role like Mia, which didn't seem important at all. "Gwyneth, I'm sure you've read the script. The role of Mia is just a vase. There's not much room for you to show off. It just makes you more familiar in front of the audience." Gwyneth Paltrow looked at how Drew was clinging to Eric. She was envious, but her expression was a little bitter. She said, "I also want a role that suits me better. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to find one." After saying that, Gwyneth Paltrow looked at Eric hopefully. For the past 2 years, she had been acting in 3 or 4 movies every year. The frequency of her appearances was enough to make those Hollywood newcomers go crazy with jealousy. However, her family's connections couldn't help her get any big roles, and the movies she acted in didn't attract much attention either. Last year, she had finally worked with Mike Mira on a novel adaptation of Emma. She had wanted to try her strategy of getting an Oscar, but in the end, she didn't even get a Golden Globe nomination. Therefore, at the suggestion of her agent, Gwyneth Paltrow decided to change her strategy and increase her chances of appearing in big movies. This way, she could increase her popularity as soon as possible. Coincidentally, MGM was planning to launch the Fast and Furious series. Considering that it was a work written by Eric himself, Gwyneth Paltrow took the initiative to ask Drew to try out for one of the roles. Before this, although the two had been as close as sisters on the surface, Gwyneth Paltrow had never used Drew's relationship in a movie. Living in Hollywood, she also understood that favors could be used once or twice, but it wouldn't work if it was used too often. Even with her family's connections, at most, she could only get the female lead role in some low-budget independent movies. If she wanted to rise up, she had to rely on her work. Gwyneth Paltrow naturally understood when Eric said that Mia's role didn't have much room for her to show off. However, Eric also underestimated the sensation that this movie that he had personally written would cause in Hollywood. This was an extension of the Secret Agent Cinematic Universe series. With the current influence of the Secret Agent Cinematic Universe in Hollywood, even a vase role under this series was enough to attract the attention of many A-list female stars. Eric saw the hope in Gwyneth Paltrow's eyes, and her expression looked like she would jump at him if he said a word. He smiled. Compared to the ordinary actors struggling in Hollywood, she already had resources that no one could compare to. Eric wouldn't be moved by her little pitiful expression. He said, "This requires opportunity. You're the same age as Drew. There's no need to rush. Maybe you'll find a suitable role soon. Well, if you're interested in Mia's role, you can give it a try." Gwyneth Paltrow was very disappointed. She wanted to refute Eric's slip of the tongue. She was actually a few years older than Drew. She was already 25 this year. However, looking at the girl's delicate face, she would definitely say something like that. Drew smiled and blinked his eyes. He didn't point out the mistake in Eric's words. He said, "Oh right, Eric, I've already found the 2 actors you mentioned. Well, they're called Paul Walker and Van Diesel, right? Amy and I looked at them together. Paul Walker is still alright, but the one called Van Diesel is simply a block of wood." After Drew finished speaking, he said something to the twins who were watching television in the living room. Natasha quickly brought a document over and passed it to Eric. Seeing Eric open it, the girl said, "There's also a videotape of the audition. Do you want to take a look?" Eric opened the document and looked at Paul Walker and Van Diesel's information. The 2 of them had been in Hollywood for a few years and weren't considered newcomers. In order to avoid the trouble of casting, Eric simply asked the girl to find the 2 of them. You can watch the video tomorrow. However, when choosing actors for a movie, it's never about the best acting skills. The most important thing is that they are suitable. Otherwise, Robert De Niro and Meryl Streep would become the most popular stars in Hollywood. Chapter 9-10. Early in the morning, perhaps because she had stayed over at Drew's house last night, Gwyneth Paltrow woke up an hour or 2 earlier than usual. When she arrived at the dining room, she saw that Eric was already sitting at the dining table and eating breakfast. After saying good morning to Eric, Gwyneth Paltrow asked the twins to prepare breakfast for her. Then she sat opposite Eric, glanced at the newspaper in his hand and asked, "Eric, Drew isn't up yet?" Eric nodded and said, "Yeah. Why are you up so early?" "It's already 7. I don't have the habit of sleeping in," Gwyneth said without any guilty expression. She looked at the glass of milk in Eric's hand, and her eyes flashed. Then she said, "Eric, I'm a little thirsty. Can I have your glass of milk first?" Eric smiled and pushed the glass next to him over. He then asked Natasha to prepare another glass for him, and continued to read his newspaper. Gwyneth took a sip of the milk and smacked her lips. She recalled the discussion between Drew and Eric last night. She looked up and asked, "Eric, are you really planning to buy 4 private jets at once?" Yeah, why? Gwyneth shrunk her neck. This time, it was not an act. When she heard Drew and Eric discussing the plan to buy 4 private jets last night, Gwyneth did not know what to feel. She came from a good family, but the number of times she had taken a private jet since she was young could be counted on one hand. Eric wanted to buy 4 private jets at once, and he also wanted to build private airports on the east and west coasts. She had never thought that such a thing would happen to her. However, when she thought about Eric's net worth, which was at the top of the Forbes list, Gwyneth felt that such a thing was only natural. However, the envy she had for Drew increased a little. How good would it be if such a thing happened to her? I just think that, can we use it all up? Hey, if you want to use it, you can borrow it from Drew. Gwyneth blinked and unconsciously leaned forward. She regretted not sitting next to Eric just now. She said coquettishly, "Can't I borrow it from you?" "Sure. Then it's a deal." Gwyneth immediately seized the opportunity and said, "However, I don't have your phone number yet. Can you give me one? The private kind." This time, Eric shook his head gently and rejected her. "If you want to contact me, just look for Drew." I was just saying that I could borrow it from you." Gwyneth pouted unhappily and took another sip of milk. She even deliberately licked the corner of her mouth teasingly. Unfortunately, Eric did not even look at her. Seeing that Eric was unmoved, Gwyneth was about to continue her efforts when the lass floated into the dining room in a daze. She was barefooted, wearing a tank top and shorts. She looked sleepy as she dragged a chair to Eric's side. She yawned and leaned lazily on Eric's shoulder. Feeling uncomfortable, her small body quickly tilted over. Gwyneth saw the doting smile on Eric's face, and the fact that he deliberately reached out to hold the lass's body to prevent her from hitting the edge of the table. She almost had the urge to roar in her heart. "You little b***tch, why don't you just sleep away?" On the other side of the table, the lass hugged Eric's arm in a daze. She moaned a few times before saying, "Eric, get Natasha to prepare the car. We'll go to Ventura later." Eric lowered his head and said softly, "Why don't you eat something first and sleep on the way later?" "Oh, I haven't brushed my teeth." "I'm not eating." "Then go brush your teeth." "I still want to take a shower." A small, fair arm stretched out from under the table and pulled Eric's collar. She said coquettishly, "Eric, carry me there." Eric had a helpless look on his face, but he put down the newspaper in his hand, reached out to carry the lass in his arms, and left the dining room. Gwyneth felt like she was being ignored the entire time. She was so angry that she wanted to throw the glass of milk in front of her. Natasha walked in with a salad and politely placed the plate in front of her. Gwyneth subconsciously wanted to find fault with them, but when she thought of how these 2 quiet Russian girls used to hit the sandbags in the gym, she swallowed her words. She felt wronged for some reason. After half an hour, Eric and Drew walked into the dining room again, chatting and laughing. Both of them had changed their clothes. Who knew if they took the opportunity to do something naughty again? Gwyneth put on a smile on her face and deliberately winked at Drew mockingly. Then she pretended to ask casually, "Drew, is building the private airport in Ventura too far away from Los Angeles?" Ventura was a small city north of Los Angeles, about 100 kilometers away from Los Angeles. Gwyneth had heard Eric and Drew talking about building the private airport in Ventura last night. Drew was a lot more energetic than before. He said, "I want to build the airport in Los Angeles too, but the runway for a Boeing 747 needs to be at least 3 kilometers long. I've been running around Los Angeles for a long time, but I couldn't find a suitable place, so I can only go to Ventura. However, it's less than 50 kilometers away from the Point Manor. It's not that far. The Point Manor is about 50 kilometers away from the Los Angeles International Airport. By the way, Kate, it's the weekend today. Do you want to come with us? Ventura is very suitable for a weekend vacation. Eric and I plan to buy a small manor or something there." Although they had agreed to go home for lunch, Gwyneth nodded without hesitation. "Sure." Her eyes were still darting between Eric and Drew. She smiled and said, "As long as you don't mind me being a third wheel." The girl immediately said, "Then you can ask your boyfriend to come along. We plan to stay in Ventura for 2 days and come back on Monday." Gwyneth subconsciously glanced at Eric. She smiled and shook her head. I don't have one now. Why don't you lend me your boyfriend? Hee, I'm not lending him. The girl smiled and shook her head. She even held Eric's arm and said, but you can come and snatch him. He'll belong to whoever snatches him. After breakfast, Eric called a group of bodyguards over. The group set off from Beverly Hills. They passed through downtown Los Angeles and went north along California Highway 1. After more than an hour, they entered another residential area. Eric sat in the middle of Drew's Land Rover Range Rover. The girl sat on the side facing the sea. They passed by Oxnard City, which was south of Ventura. She pointed regretfully at a large area surrounded by barbed wire. What a pity. If only we could build the airport here. Eric only smiled. Gwyneth, who was sitting on the other side of Eric, leaned over. She leaned against Eric and looked out. She asked curiously, why not build it here? I think it's quite suitable here too. Summer clothes were especially thin. Eric felt Gwyneth's soft body deliberately leaning against him. He was too lazy to avoid her. He smiled and explained, this is the Magoo Naval Base. Hee, that definitely won't work. Gweenie smiled, but she did not move her body away. She continued, if that's the case, can we build the private airport nearby? I remember that there's a no-fly zone near the military base, right? No problem. Before Eric could answer, Drew said, I've already consulted a lawyer. Also, Oxnard has 2 civilian airports. The one in the north is less than 10 kilometers from here. If there's a no-fly zone, these 2 airports won't be able to exist. They chatted along the way as they passed through Oxnard. Soon they arrived at Ventura City, which was close to the north. Eric and the group first stayed at a private resort in Ventura City. Then they went with an official from Ventura City to the location that Drew had chosen to build the airport. The plot of land was next to a dry river in the south of Ventura City. Eric and Drew got out of the car together and saw that it was still farmland in front of them. The official from Ventura City, Jack Wilson, also got out of the car. He brought Eric and the group along a simple cement road through the farmland. He explained, Mr. Williams, look, the Ventura Harbor is in the south. If you have a yacht, you can dock it there. Oh, the plot of land that needs to be built is here. 3 kilometers to the west and 1 kilometer to the south from here. That's a total of 300 hectares of land. Miss Bellymore said that this airport needs to be able to dock 10 planes. This plot of land is definitely enough. Of course, if you want to build 2 cross-shaped runways, you'll have to extend them to the north by at least 500 meters. But I don't think that's necessary. The 2 civilian airports in Oxnard have 1 runway too. Eric nodded and asked the girl beside him, are we building 1 runway or 2? The girl grinned and extended 2 fingers. The plot of land in Chongdao has already been chosen. Just 2 runways. Miss Bellymore, this place can't be compared to Chongdao, Jack Wilson interrupted with a smile. We're in a densely populated area. If you want to draw a bigger plot of land, not only will you have to spend more money, but the review will also take longer. After all, if we go further north, we'll be near the residential area. If you want to build it, you'll have to get the consent of the people first. If the distance to where we are is just right, you won't have to hold a hearing. You can also start the construction as soon as possible. Eric felt that he had been troubled by the land issue recently. Looking at the large plot of land in the north of the road, he didn't think too much about it. He planned to take down as much land as possible to avoid the predicament of Firefly Studios in the future. So he said, if it's possible, let's build 2 runways. We're not in a hurry. If we can extend them to the north by 1 kilometer, we can take down 600 hectares of land. Since Eric had decided, Jack Wilson smiled and nodded. He only said, in this case, Mr. Williams, it'll take at least a year to start the construction of this airport. Eric smiled and asked, Jack, don't you want me to buy as much land as possible? This can contribute more taxes to Ventura, right? Jack Wilson nodded. There was some shrewdness in his eyes. He said, of course. However, these taxes have nothing to do with me. I'm only responsible for providing you with the most reasonable suggestions. They chatted and laughed as they walked around the surrounding land for half an hour. Jack Wilson explained to Eric in detail all the things that needed to be paid attention to when building a private airport. When it was close to noon, everyone returned to Ventura together. As a small city that mainly focused on leisure, there were hundreds of yachts of various sizes docked in Ventura's harbor. After finishing their business, everyone rented a yacht and went out to sea in the afternoon. The white yacht drifted leisurely on the sea more than 10 kilometers away from the coastline. Eric wore beach pants and sunglasses as he lay on the deck and basked in the sun. When he saw the twins turn off the engine and drop the anchor, he sat up and asked with a smile, "I didn't know you guys knew how to drive a yacht. By the way, do you know how to fly a plane?" The two girls smiled shyly and sat down next to Drew meekly. One of them nodded and said, "Helicopter, yes." The girl next to Eric also got up and hugged Eric's arm. She giggled and said, "Eric, they know everything. Maybe they're agents sent by the KGB to lure you." Eric knocked the girl's head and looked at the twins. He joked, "They really do look alike. So beautiful. Tell me what you plan to do. As long as you don't kill me, I'll try my best to cooperate." The twins still smiled shyly and shook their heads. "No, master. The boss sent us to learn." Gwyneth, who had already sat up on the other side of Eric, felt that she was being ignored again. She put down the juice in her hand and took the initiative to find a topic. "Eric, didn't you say you wanted to buy 4 private jets? Why did Jack Wilson say it was more than 10? Eric explained, "It's definitely a waste to build a private airport with only 4 private jets. There are some other people who will buy them together." Gwyneth was still a little curious. "Who?" Eric did not answer. He smiled and said, "You can buy them too. Just store them here." Gwyneth's eyes were filled with yearning, but she shook her head regretfully. She looked at Eric with some inexplicable hope and said, "I can't even afford a good car now, let alone a private jet. When you become a big star in the future, you'll be able to afford it. Who knows when that will happen? Also, even if I want to buy one, I definitely can't afford a Boeing." Gwyneth looked enviously at Drew, who was whispering to the twins. She then said, "Eric, buying 1,500 acres of land here. Oh, that's 600 hectares of land. It should be very expensive, right?" Eric liked to use hectares as a unit of area. The official named Jack Wilson in the morning had purposely gone along with his habit. Gwyneth was obviously influenced by their conversation in the morning, so she purposely changed the unit of area from acres to hectares. If it was Los Angeles, it would be very expensive. It's different here. If it's just land, it won't exceed $20 million. Although the land that Drew wanted was near Ventura City, it was just farmland. It could not be that expensive. Jeffrey had only spent $7 million to buy a 2,000-acre farm in Maryland. The most expensive part of building a private airport was actually the later operations and maintenance. Chapter 9-11. After the weekend, they returned to Los Angeles from Ventura. Eric instructed Kelly to pick out a team from the assistant's office to follow up on the construction of private airports on the east and west coasts, as well as the purchase of 2 Boeing 747-402 Gulfstream V airliners. Eric himself focused on the casting of several movies and the expansion of Firefly Studios. Due to the intensive casting of Iron Man, Spider-Man, the Lord of the Rings trilogy and the Fast and Furious series, the demand for actors in these heavyweight films covered almost all ages in Hollywood. In addition, the Firefly system had shown brilliantly in recent years, allowing many unknown actors to become Hollywood superstars. Therefore, although the Pierce Brosnan incident had just happened, causing many big names in Hollywood to complain about the stinginess of the Firefly system, Hollywood was still very lively recently. Actors who wanted to get roles in these series were doing their best. So, even though The X-Files is over, you still have contact with Brad Pitt? At the Pointy Corner Manor, Eric and Famke Johnson were making breakfast together in the dining room. When he heard her talk to him about Brad Pitt wanting to play Tony Stark, he asked with a half-teasing smile. After The X-Files ended, Famke did not take on any film contracts in the past 6 months. Instead, she traveled around and did charity work. She had just returned to Los Angeles and had been living at the Pointy Corner Manor recently. "Charissa called me," Famke Johnson explained. Seeing Eric's confused face, she smiled and said, Charissa Cody is Pitt's agent. You should have seen her before. After working together for so many years, we get along quite well, so I helped her pass a message to you. Eric vaguely remembered Charissa Cody. She seemed to be quite capable and had even joined ICM. However, he had not seen her for many years. After so many years, their positions in Hollywood were now worlds apart. Eric no longer had any prejudice against Brad Pitt, or rather, he did not have any feelings at all. After bringing the breakfast into the dining room and sitting down at the table, Eric calmly analyzed, Brad Pitt's acting is not bad, but his image is not suitable for Tony Stark. After thinking about it, Eric smiled inexplicably and said, However, there's another role that I can let him try, Thor. But if he wants this role, he'll have to wait patiently. The Thor movie will only start after Spider-Man and Iron Man are released. In history, Marvel had once hoped that Brad Pitt could play Thor. However, at that time, Brad Pitt had already begun to transform into a director and producer. This kind of comic character change did not have much appeal to him, so the two sides did not reach a cooperation. However, it was different now. Due to Eric's intervention, although Brad Pitt had gained a lot of fame with his role as the male lead in The X-Files, after the series ended, he would become a newcomer in the film industry. Moreover, due to the influence of The X-Files, his development in the film industry would definitely not be as smooth as before. However, Brad Pitt was indeed a good candidate to play Thor. The Thor movie would only start in about 2 years. At that time, the influence of The X-Files would begin to dissipate. Famke Johnson nodded and said, Then I'll reply to Charissa like this. Oh right, and you, how's the X-Men comic I gave you going? It's very interesting. I really like the role of Jean Grey, Famke Johnson said. When do you plan to shoot X-Men? I haven't heard anything about it. You'll have to wait for another 2 or 3 years, Eric explained. My plan is to first open up the Marvel Cinematic Universe through the Spider-Man and Iron Man movies. This way, the project will be much easier to push forward. You can shoot a few movies in the next 2 years to get a feel for it. Filming a TV series is always different from filming a movie. In that case, I'll be going back to the Netherlands soon. My sister is preparing a movie and wants me to play a role. Speaking of which, Famke Johnson had 3 sisters in his family. The other 2 were a director and an actress, but both of them were developing their careers in Europe. When Eric heard Famke's words, he reluctantly advised, You just came back and you're leaving again. If it's you, let your sister come to Hollywood to develop her career. Famke Johnson said, My sister's temper is much stronger than mine. She also knows about my relationship with you, so she won't come over. Eric smiled and said, Looks like I'm lucky to have caught the weakest of you sisters. Famke Johnson rolled her eyes at Eric and said, It's all because you're an asshole. Eric smiled proudly and finished his breakfast in 2 or 3 bites. He reached out to hug Famke and show her his asshole side. He felt her curl up one of her long legs to block his attack. He conveniently hugged the long leg that poked out of her shorts and said with a smile, Okay, I'm going to work. Come give me a kiss. Famke helplessly turned her face to the side and let Eric kiss her. With a smile on her lips, she pretended to be dissatisfied and muttered, I'll buy a ticket back to the Netherlands today. Eric kissed Famke's lips and lowered his head to kiss her seductive long leg. Hearing the girl's ticklish laughter, he said, No, I recently rented a Boeing 767. When do you plan to leave? I'll get someone to send you. After being busy for more than half a month, the audition for the male lead of Iron Man had entered the second round. The audition list had been reduced from the initial selection of hundreds to 50. Eric also planned to participate in the next few rounds of auditions. However, when Eric rushed to Firefly Studios, Katzenberg also rushed over with several theme park designers. It turned out that the design team responsible for the development of the Firefly Studios theme park project had already come up with a plan to develop a theme park on the western part of Lincoln Avenue. Because the residents in the eastern part of the park were waiting for a good price, the studio could not expand to the east in the short term. The company could only focus on developing the western part of Lincoln Avenue. Mr. Williams, look, we can build a bridge on Lincoln Avenue to connect the 2 movie parks. In addition, in order to connect the Titanic theme exhibition area to the Western Park without affecting the daily operations of the studio and other areas, we can open an exclusive passage on the edge of the Eastern Park and set up some movie themes in this passage to add interest and prevent tourists from feeling bored on the way. Eric looked at the design slides and listened to the other party's general explanation. He shook his head and said, "It still won't work. No one likes to walk a kilometer in a corridor. What's more, the Eastern Park should also be part of the theme park tour. Then we can open a few doors in the area that is open for sightseeing. I'm not talking about the doors, but I feel that the idea of an exclusive passage doesn't work in the first place. It will make people feel claustrophobic. If you have experienced it, you will definitely know how bad this feeling is," Eric said. He got up and walked to the slide projector. He asked the secretary who operated the slides to switch a few pictures. Then he stopped at the design of a bridge across Lincoln Avenue. After staring at the drawing for a while, Eric raised his hand and drew a long line in the air. He said, "How about this? We can raise and extend this bridge and build an aerial corridor connecting the Titanic Exhibition Hall and the Western Park. What do you think?" Katzenberg's eyes lit up when he heard Eric's words. He also stood up and walked over. He nodded and said, "I think this idea is very good. Most of the Eastern Park is not suitable for tourists, but if there is such an aerial corridor, they can visit the entire park from above. This is much better than the idea of a ground passage." Several designers also came over. One of them said, "However, such an aerial corridor will definitely be very expensive, right?" Eric shook his head and said to the designer, "Gary, let's not consider the cost first. Think about it. Not far from our south is the Los Angeles International Airport that handles 60 million passengers a year. Although most of the passengers at the airport take the 405 freeway in the west, as long as 1/5 of them pass through Lincoln Avenue. That is 12 million people. If this aerial corridor is built and becomes a landmark building on Lincoln Avenue, it is equivalent to advertising Firefly Studios in front of 12 million tourists from all over the world for free every year. This effect is definitely comparable to a bridge that is only for tourists to pass safely." The designer named Gary nodded. He raised his hand and drew a line between the Eastern and Western parks. He said, "Mr. Williams, if we don't consider the construction cost, we can make this corridor span the entire Eastern and Western parks. Not only will it be symmetrical, but it will also be more beautiful. At the same time, the 4-kilometer-long aerial corridor will also be more visually stunning." After Gary finished speaking, the others also put forward their own ideas. Eric had many spectacular aerial corridors in his memory. He had also walked some high-altitude plank roads in his previous life. The design of these suspended corridors had left a deep impression on Eric. Now, since there was such an opportunity and he had enough financial strength, Eric naturally wanted to build a sky corridor that belonged to him, just like the Freedom City Villa in Malibu. Everyone discussed for more than half an hour, and the idea was basically finalized. However, the concept could be endless, but to get a feasible plan, the theme park designers needed to make detailed plans, such as what form the aerial corridor would take, what materials would be used, how high would it be built, and so on. After sending the designers away, Eric and Katzenberg went to another office building in the studio. The audition for the male lead of Iron Man was held here. Because he had informed them in advance that they didn't have to wait for him, the members of the Iron Man team had already begun the audition. Eric and Katzenberg nodded and greeted a group of actors waiting in the corridor. They pushed the door open and entered the audition room. A white man in his 30s was performing a scene with the cooperation of the staff. When he saw Eric and Katzenberg coming in, he couldn't help but pause. He didn't know if he should continue. Mr. Rockwell, you can continue." Eric smiled and nodded to the other party. Sam Rockwell didn't expect Eric to recognize him. He quickly responded with a smile, found the feeling, and then gestured to the female assistant who was reading the lines. Eric nodded to director Joss Whedon and the others. He didn't sit behind the audition table. He just pulled a chair and sat down with Katzenberg. He took a stack of actor information from an assistant and looked up to watch Sam Rockwell's performance. Sam Rockwell was personally selected by Eric as one of the last 50 candidates. In history, Sam Rockwell participated in the audition for the male lead of Iron Man, but he didn't get the role. In the end, he played the villain Justin Hammer in Iron Man 2. The main villain of Iron Man 2 was Whip, so Sam Rockwell's performance wasn't too eye-catching. However, the Justin Hammer he played was indeed very similar to Robert Downey Jr. in some details. Eric happened to remember this, so he arranged for the other party to participate in this round of auditions. However, during the audition process, although he specifically mentioned a few things, Sam Rockwell's audition effect was difficult to satisfy Eric. He felt that something was missing. In the end, Eric had a flash of inspiration. He instructed the staff to find a pair of black-rimmed glasses for Sam Rockwell to wear. Sam Rockwell's temperament suddenly reached Eric's effect. He changed from his original image of a street ruffian to an overbearing CEO with a smirk on his face. Unfortunately, Tony Stark definitely couldn't wear glasses. After Sam Rockwell left, everyone realized Eric's special attitude towards him just now. They looked over, obviously asking for Eric's opinion. Eric shook his head regretfully. His acting is good, but if he doesn't wear glasses, he won't be able to support the temperament that Tony Stark needs. He definitely won't be able to wear glasses. Call the next one. Joss Whedon and the others breathed a sigh of relief. They felt the same as Eric. However, everyone knew that Eric often made unexpected decisions, so they were a little worried. If Eric leaned toward Sam Rockwell, it wouldn't be a good thing. Chapter 9:12. After a week of auditions and eliminations, the candidates for the lead actor in Iron Man were reduced from the final 50 to 10. In order to select Tony Stark from the final 10 people, several creatives of the crew began to hold frequent meetings to discuss it. David, this won't do. I need you to do it again. Remember, Tony Stark's pride is engraved in his bones, and he doesn't need to deliberately show it on the surface. So you need to speak more matter-of-factly. For the remaining 10 candidates, the crew no longer held a centralized audition. Instead, they held in-depth discussions and auditions with the candidates one by one, and gradually eliminated them. This way, the most suitable candidate could be selected more carefully. In a conference room in the studio, Eric patiently explained his views on Tony Stark to David Duchovny, who had participated in the discussion today. David Duchovny was originally supposed to be the male lead of the X-Files, but due to the changes in history, he was still just a small character in various independent movies or TV shows. Eric didn't feel much about David Duchovny's performance in the X-Files, but he really liked his other work, California Crush. In California Crush, David Duchovny played the down-and-out writer Hank Moody, who shuttled between all kinds of beautiful women, left a deep impression on people. After Eric finished speaking, David Duchovny, who was sitting on the sofa opposite him, thought for a moment and said, "Then Eric, I'll try again." Eric turned his head and was about to instruct the staff next to him to give David Duchovny lines, when he noticed that everyone, including Joss Whedon, was looking at him strangely. This was obviously not the first time, but recently, Eric had been feeling that the atmosphere around him was a little strange. At this moment, he finally couldn't help but explode. "I'm warning you, if you dare look at me with such admiration all day long, I'll dock your pay. Sally, run through the scene with David again." Several people sitting around the sofa chuckled. The production assistant named Sally picked up the script and looked at David Duchovny. After getting confirmation, she began to recite the lines of Kristen, the reporter from Vanity Fair magazine in Iron Man. "Some people say that you're the modern Da Vinci. What do you think?" "Nonsense, I'm not a painter." "What about the other nickname, Death Merchant?" "That's not bad," David Duchovny replied. "Let me guess. Berkeley?" "Actually, Brown University." "Well, Miss Brown, this world is not perfect, but we have no choice. I promise you, if there comes a day when I don't need to use weapons to exchange for peace, I will change my profession and go to Good Children's Hospital." Just as the two were about to continue, Eric interrupted. "Stop, it still doesn't work. David, you should speak faster. Also, this scene can't be too casual. Anyway, think about it again. If it doesn't work, we'll change to the next scene." After a brief hesitation, David Duchovny asked, Eric, can you demonstrate it for me? Eric had not been able to find the right adjective for a moment, but when he heard David Duchovny's words, he nodded without thinking too much. He turned to the production assistant and said, Sally, let's start with that scene. As Eric spoke, he didn't see Joss Whedon excitedly gesture to the cameraman behind him. The cameraman naturally turned the camera to Eric. Sally noticed Joss Whedon's little gesture behind Eric, but pretended not to notice. She lowered her eyes and looked at the script in her hand. She raised her head and read, Mr. Stark, you've rehearsed this sentence many times, right? Eric didn't need to read the lines at all. Whether it was the recent auditions or the memories in his mind, Eric was familiar with the entire script. Similarly, no one knew better than him what kind of effect he wanted. After quickly sorting out his thoughts, Eric replied naturally, I say it in the mirror every night before I go to bed. Sally nodded. I can tell. With a cynical smile on his face, Eric stared at Sally and said, I hope you can see it with your own eyes. Under Eric's natural and invasive gaze, Sally suddenly felt her face heat up. She dodged and stuttered a little. Although she was also very familiar with the script, she still mispronounced her lines. Mr. Williams, I hope you can be a little more serious. Eric was speechless. Ha! Everyone in the room couldn't help but laugh. Realizing her mistake, Sally's face quickly turned red. She couldn't have felt more embarrassed. She raised the script in front of her and ran to the bathroom next door. Looking at the girls fleeing action, everyone's heartless laughter grew louder. After a while, Eric clapped his hands and said, Okay everyone, let's continue. Skip this part and switch to the part where Tony Stark and Colonel Rhodes are on the plane. Since Eric said that, everyone stopped laughing and continued their discussion. When it was almost evening, after seeing David Duchovny off, Eric was about to discuss the effect of David Duchovny's performance today with Joss Whedon and the others, when Joss Whedon said, Eric, it's almost time to get off work. How about we go for a drink? Eric was puzzled. I mean there are a few good bars in Venice Beach, Joss Whedon said. Also, I want to talk to you about something else. Actually, that's what everyone wants. Looking at Joss Whedon's expression, Eric nodded. Okay, let's call it a day. Due to the rise of Firefly Studios, Venice Beach near Praia Vista had become a popular gathering place for Hollywood filmmakers in recent years. Many restaurants, cafes, bars and other leisure places had also sprung up. When he followed Joss Whedon to a bar called Light, Eric suddenly realized that he hadn't had such an experience in a long time. It just so happened that it was time to get off work. Although night had not yet fallen, the bar was already bustling with activity. Eric wore sunglasses and followed Joss Whedon into the bar. He watched as Joss Whedon greeted the boss familiarly and asked for a relatively remote booth in the corner of the bar. The two of them sat down together. After ordering a glass of beer from the waiter who followed them, Joss Whedon asked, Eric, what would you like to drink? Eric felt that the scantily clad waitress in front of him was staring at him, so he simply took off his sunglasses and raised a finger at the girl who was staring at him with wide eyes. He then smiled and said, I'll have a glass of beer too. Okay. The waitress nodded in surprise, turned around, and left in a hurry. But after a while, she came back with 2 glasses of beer. She had obviously touched up her makeup, and had even taken off the somewhat exaggerated earrings on her ears. After placing the beers in front of Eric and Joss Whedon, the girl did not leave. Instead, she boldly asked, Mr. Williams, can I take a picture with you? Eric smiled and shook his head. I'm sorry, miss. The waitress was not discouraged. She took out a business card from the pocket of her short jacket and stuffed it into his hand. Mr. Williams, this is my number. Give me a call. After saying that, the waitress did not give Eric a chance to refuse. She turned around and left, swaying her slender waist. Eric picked up the business card and looked at it. He said, Jenny. I think it's better to call her Jennifer. I like the name Jennifer. Joss Whedon laughed and said, Call her over now and ask her to change her name. I don't think that girl will refuse. I'm not in the mood for such boring things. Eric shook his head and placed the business card on the table. He looked at Joss Whedon and said, So Joss, What do you want to talk to me about? Eric, who do you think fits your requirements the most among the candidates we auditioned recently? Eric smiled and picked up the business card on the table again. He said, I'm guessing that's not what you want to talk about tonight, right? Joss Whedon shrugged and said, Eric, I'm sure you've realized how everyone has been feeling recently. Huh. All of us feel that you're the one who knows the role of Tony Stark the best. You know more than all the other candidates we've been through during this period. In the past few weeks, you've been repeatedly instructing these actors on how to act, what kind of expression they should use, and what kind of tone they should use. Eric raised his head. You want me to play Tony Stark too? Joss Whedon nodded. I've already discussed it with Mr. Katzenberg and Mr. Allard in private. They all think that this plan is feasible. Eric hesitated for a moment. Thinking of the recent auditions, he was indeed dissatisfied with all the candidates. In fact, when he recalled Robert Downey's performance in the movie, Eric felt that many of his details were not satisfactory. Joss, you have to know that I'm already a producer. If I take on the role of the lead actor, you may be sidelined at any time as the director. If you can make this movie more perfect, I won't have a problem even if you want me to quit the cast, Joss Whedon said without hesitation. Eric, I'm also a fan of Iron Man comics, so I really hope that this movie can have the most suitable male lead. I haven't even participated in an audition. Although I know what kind of Tony Stark I want. Are you sure that I can act well? Joss Whedon smiled and said, Eric, I think you don't even need to act. You just need to be yourself. Just look at how Sally and you reacted to the lines in the afternoon. Sally never blushed in front of the other actors. As a playboy, Tony Stark must be able to have a strong attraction to women. Besides, I've been secretly observing you for a month. A lot of your words and actions are very similar to the Tony Stark we want. Eric unconsciously folded the business card in his hand into a paper airplane. Hearing Joss Whedon's words, he raised his head and said, Okay, let's choose from these 10 people first. Joss Whedon felt that Eric's tone had softened, so he did not hesitate to continue. Eric, I know you're very busy, but you should also know that the filming of Iron Man won't take up too much of your time. The planned filming cycle is 4 months. If the schedule is tight, you only need to stay on set for less than 2 months, and most of that can be done in the studio in Los Angeles. Even if it's overseas scenes, we only need to rush to the neighboring state of Nevada. That's not the point, Joss, Eric said. In the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, Iron Man needs to appear in more than one movie, but the entire series. Joss Whedon said, but that's even less of a problem. Eric, except for a few Iron Man films, you'll definitely appear in fewer scenes in the other crossovers. Maybe you won't even need a month. Moreover, we're making an Iron Man film, and the average cycle is 2 years, so you can take 2 months out of every 2 years. I think this shouldn't be a problem for you at all, right? Looks like you've decided to let me do it personally? Joss Whedon smiled and said, Eric, to be honest, have you really never thought of playing the role yourself? Eric's eyes flashed and he said, I've thought of playing the role of Hugh Hefner, but I don't know if he's collected 2,000 girlfriends yet. Haha, that's the tone. Joss Whedon laughed and said, Tony Stark's tone. Okay, I'll think about it. I'll give you an answer tomorrow. The day after tomorrow. Eric threw the small paper airplane in his hand at Joss Whedon. He used a little more force, but the airplane flew past the barrier and into a nearby cubicle. Then a girl's soft cry could be heard. Joss Whedon knew Eric had changed his mind and was about to continue persuading him when 2 petite girls walked over angrily. One of the girls in a black dress was still holding the paper airplane in her hand. There were water stains on it, and it had probably flown into a wine glass or something. The 2 girls were about to criticize Eric when they recognized him at a glance. Their angry expressions immediately disappeared, and for a moment, they didn't know what to say and just stood there like 2 little quails. With a smile on his face, Eric looked at the 2 girls with great interest. He raised his hand and pointed at Joss Whedon. This guy was the one who threw the thing. Don't blame me. The girl in the black dress standing on the left was the first to react. She hurriedly said, Sorry, Mr. Williams, we're fine. With that, the girl in the black dress was about to pull her companion away. However, Eric looked at the girl who was slightly taller and still had some baby fat on her face. He said, Sarah, right? I happen to remember your name. Sarah Michelle Gellar, the little girl in Thriller on a Small Island. You've already grown so big. With that, Eric looked at the other girl and asked knowingly, What's your name? It's me. The girl in the black dress did not expect Eric to know her friend. She hurriedly said, My name is Jennifer Love Hewitt. Oh, another Jennifer. I like a girl named Jennifer. Can I buy you a glass of wine? Chapter 9:13. Joss Whedon watched Eric chatting with the two girls in full swing, making the two girls giggle from time to time. He felt both helpless and a little envious. Although the two girls were very sophisticated and glanced at him from time to time, seemingly worried that he would be left out, their eyes and thoughts were almost completely focused on Eric at this time. With the unparalleled power in Hollywood in his hands and being so young, Eric's attraction to women was like a bright light that tempted moths in the dark. Knowing that it was definitely impossible to talk about business tonight, Joss Whedon did not intend to continue to stay here as a foil. Taking advantage of the gap in their conversation, he said, Eric, think about that matter carefully. I happen to have something to do, so I'll take my leave first. Eric stopped talking and laughing with the two girls, got up and said, Don't worry, I'll think about it carefully. Joss Whedon looked at the petite Jennifer Love Hewitt who had just sat next to him, and took the initiative to make way for him. He thought about it, and before he left, he made a gesture on his chest without leaving a trace. Eric naturally understood that Joss Whedon was reminding him to pay attention to the age of the two girls. Both Sarah and Jennifer were less than 1.6 meters tall, which was relatively rare in Hollywood where hot girls ran rampant. Joss Whedon inevitably felt that the two girls were still underage. He smiled knowingly and gave Joss Whedon a knowing look. He watched him leave and looked at Jennifer Love Hewitt, who had taken Joss Whedon's seat and was sitting opposite him. He smiled and said, Where were we just now? The Victoria's Secret Angels. Sarah and I are very curious. How can they maintain their figures so well? It can be said to be perfect. This is really not easy. Not to mention other things, you may not know, but many of the Victoria's Secret Angels basically eat less in the week or two before the annual big show in order to maintain their figures. As she was sitting next to Eric, Sarah Michelle Gellar happened to notice Joss Whedon's gesture. She had entered Hollywood at a very young age, so she naturally understood what the secret signals used by these men meant. Thinking of what might happen next, Sarah Michelle Gellar's face became a little hot. When she heard Eric's words, she asked, Won't you feel hungry if you don't eat? They can only endure the hunger. So you two don't have to envy them, and you don't have to think about becoming Victoria's Secret Angel. Jennifer Love Hewitt stuck out her tongue and said, Even if we wanted to, we couldn't. We're too short. Being short is actually an advantage for you guys. Many Victoria's Secret Angels who want to enter Hollywood are rejected because they are too tall, Eric said. Then he asked curiously, By the way, what films have you guys been filming recently? Jennifer Love Hewitt's eyes lit up, but she immediately calmed down. She pretended to be casual and said, Sarah and I just attended an audition for a movie this afternoon. I don't know if we can get the role. Sitting opposite her, Eric naturally noticed the change in Jennifer Love Hewitt's eyes. He looked at Sarah next to him, and then looked at Jennifer opposite him. He smiled and said, You two are too similar. Height, face, and even temperament are similar. Even if you two are not competing for the same role, the crew will only keep one of you. Then what should we do? Jennifer Love Hewitt glanced at Sarah next to Eric and said worriedly. She actually knew this, so she and Sarah weren't very close friends. It was just that the two of them had a lot of similarities in their personalities, so they could get along well with each other. Eric shrugged and said, This can't be helped. Jennifer Love Hewitt mustered up her courage and looked at Eric eagerly. She said, Eric, can't even you? That's an MGM movie. Eric raised his eyebrows and asked, Oh, what's the name of the movie? They haven't finalized the name yet. They're still calling it according to the original novel. It sounds very long. It's called, I Know What You Did Last Summer. Eric thought for a while and said, Kevin Williamson's script. Yes. Jennifer Love Hewitt nodded and said, Eric, you know this script too? In his memory, I Know What You Did Last Summer was from Sony Columbia. However, Kevin Williamson sold 5 scripts to MGM for $500,000. There were 3 Scream in the plan. Before the contract was completed, he could not provide scripts to other film companies. In recent years, due to the success of Scream, Kevin Williamson could be said to be the most popular teen horror screenwriter in Hollywood. MGM also gave Kevin Williamson an extra bonus. The cooperation between the two sides had always been pleasant. However, I Know What You Did Last Summer, a horror film similar to Scream, would not cost more than $20 million at most. Even within the Firefly Group, Eric rarely intervened in films that cost less than $20 million, let alone this MGM movie. I don't know, it's just a guess. Eric shook his head truthfully and said, however, such a movie is actually very suitable for you. Seeing that Eric was talking to Jennifer Love Hewitt most of the time, Sarah Michelle Gellar calmed down her chaotic thoughts and took the initiative to say, Eric, I heard that Firefly is casting for Spider-Man, right? Eric turned his head and looked at Sarah. Oh, are you interested in Gwen Stacy? Sarah Michelle Gellar avoided Eric's gaze, but she still nodded frankly and said, actually, I admire director Cameron very much. I watched his Titanic 5 times. I will be angry if you praise other directors in front of me. Sarah shook her head quickly and said, no, Eric, you are actually better. Jennifer Love Hewitt did not expect Sarah to take the initiative to mention Spider-Man. In fact, this was what she had been thinking about just now. Thinking about the popularity of the heroine of Titanic, Rachel Weisz, the heroine of Cameron's new film, Gwen Stacy, was definitely the dream role of all women of the right age in Hollywood. Jennifer smiled proudly and said, Eric, I also think that you are actually better. My agent said that it is a miracle to produce a movie with a global box office of more than $2 billion. But it is even more miraculous to produce 2 movies with a global box office of more than $1 billion twice in a row. Eric smiled and said, to be honest, I can assure you that only actors who have never worked with Jim would feel the way you do. If you've worked with him before, you probably won't want to act in his movies for the rest of your lives. Sarah Michelle Gellar was a little skeptical. She said, I also heard that he is very fierce on set, but it shouldn't be that serious, right? Speaking of which, Eric glanced at the 2 girls with a smile on his face, but his expression was still serious. He said, I happen to have a videotape of Jim shooting Titanic at home. You can't see it outside. Do you want to take a look at it? The 2 girls' faces suddenly blushed together. They looked at each other and moved away at the same time. They were actually looking forward to tonight, but they didn't know which one of them Eric would invite. They didn't expect that Eric would invite both of them at the same time. Because they were both child stars, even if they had been exposed to many things in Hollywood for many years, they still felt that this was unacceptable. Eric smiled, picked up the sunglasses hanging on his collar, and put them on. He said, okay, I'm just kidding. I have to go. See you next time. The 2 girls who were in a daze looked at each other at the same time. Jennifer Love Hewitt was obviously more decisive. She was 2 years younger than Sarah, so her development in Hollywood was not as good as Sarah's. If she let go of this opportunity, she could imagine that she would only be suppressed by Sarah, who was more famous than her in the future. Standing up with Eric, Jennifer Love Hewitt said, Eric, then, I actually want to go and take a look too. Sitting next to Eric, Sarah also stood up at this time. Her eyes flashed as she noticed the smug look on Jennifer's face. She suddenly had some competitive thoughts in her heart. She naturally took Eric's arm next to her, smiled sweetly and said, Eric, I'll go too. After leaving the bar, the 2 girls got into Eric's car together. When the car arrived at the Sharp Corner Manor and followed Eric into the Shell Villa, the 2 girls began to feel at a loss again. As the 3 of them entered, the lights in the villa's hall automatically lit up. Eric looked at the 2 girls behind him with hesitant expressions and said, you don't have to change your shoes. Just come in. Sarah and Jennifer wanted to roll their eyes in their hearts. They didn't look like they were considering whether to change their shoes or not. Eric said and walked towards the kitchen. The 2 girls looked at each other, and could only carefully follow. Although their hearts were in a mess, their eyes still couldn't help but look at the luxurious villa. It was inevitable that some unrealistic fantasies would arise in their hearts. Following Eric to the kitchen, Jennifer Love Hewitt saw Eric standing next to the open refrigerator. She was the first to let go of the scruples in her heart. Being in this luxurious villa made her more directly and deeply understand Eric's identity and influence in Hollywood. For such a big shot, even if he wanted the two of them at once, it seemed to be a matter of course. Walking over quietly, Jennifer Love Hewitt whispered, "Eric, can I drink some more wine?" Eric took out a box of juice from the refrigerator and stuffed it into the girl's hand. He then handed another box to Sarah and said, "It's a little late now, don't drink anymore. Let's go, I'll take you to see a movie. To be honest, I haven't watched a movie quietly for a long time." Sarah had just removed the straw from the juice box. When she heard Eric's words, she raised her head and asked in confusion, "Eric, didn't you say, let us watch director Cameron's highlights from the set?" "Oh, what's so good about the scene of Jim roaring on the set?" Eric took some snacks and drinks and put them on a tray. He closed the refrigerator door and said, "Come with me. How about a horror movie? It's definitely scarier than the scene of Jim going crazy." The two girls looked at each other again. Sarah took the initiative to take the tray from Eric's hand and followed him out of the kitchen with a red face. They walked through the spacious hall to the other side in their high heels. After entering the private screening room, Jennifer whispered again, "It's so big here. It's so tiring to walk." Eric turned on the lights and joked, "Then do you want to stay here for a while? It's a lot of exercise. It's good for keeping your figure." Sarah put down the tray and wanted to refute, but after thinking about it, she stopped herself. "Then, what movie do you want to watch? If you really want to see Jim's highlights from the set, there are really some here," Eric said as he led the two girls into the room next to him that was filled with all kinds of movie copies. The two girls looked at the several large bookshelves that reached the ceiling, which were densely packed with videotapes, DVDs, and even film copies. They looked through the room for a while in amazement. After a few minutes, Jennifer took out a film copy from a shelf. "Eric, this is The Exorcist. I've always wanted to watch this movie, but unfortunately, I've never dared to." "Then The Exorcist it is." Eric walked over and took the film copy from Jennifer. He said, "Actually, I haven't watched it yet." Sarah walked over and smiled. "Don't tell me you're scared too?" Eric shrugged and said, "You'll know when you see it." Even so, Eric still underestimated the horror of William Friedkin's super horror movie. Not long after the movie started, the two girls squeezed on the sofa with Eric screamed in fear. Eric himself felt his scalp go numb from time to time. Finally, when the girl possessed by the evil spirit turned her head 180 degrees, Eric picked up the remote control next to him, and the screening room suddenly turned completely dark. The sudden darkness made the two girls, who were already in a state of fear, scream again. Sarah was the first to react. Her voice was still trembling. "Eric, what's wrong? Is there a power outage?" "I turned it off." After a short silence, the two girls leaning on Eric laughed at the same time. "Ha ha ha ha, so you're scared too." "Hee hee, I'm dying of laughter. Eric, you actually want to scare us with a horror movie." Feeling the two bodies still sticking to him without any scruples, Eric hugged them and warned, "Don't laugh, I'm angry." "Ha ha." The laughter continued for a moment, but the two girls' laughter soon changed as Eric moved in the dark. "Eric, oh don't be like this. Be gentle, my clothes are going to be torn." "Well, the button, it's in front." Perhaps it was the darkness, but the two girls, who were already mentally prepared, did not resist. Soon, a series of imaginative voices sounded in the dark screening room. Chapter 9:14. The faint morning light shone into the master bedroom in Free City. Eric was the first to wake up. He gently stroked the smooth skin of the girl in his arms, but he was thinking about Iron Man. In the script, after Tony Stark had sex with Kristen, a reporter from Vanity Fair, not only would he avoid her the next morning, but he would also feel awkward when they met again. This was definitely not the reaction of a playboy who had slept with all the cover girls of fashion magazines throughout the year. Well, it had to be changed. Staring at the ceiling and quietly pondering the details of the script for a while, Eric couldn't help but laugh silently. All right, then I'll do it myself. At the pace of an average of one movie every 2 years, the schedule was indeed very easy to arrange. No longer dwelling on the problem, Eric felt the girl leaning against his chest, who had originally been breathing calmly, become rapid. Looking down, the girl's eyes were still closed, as if she didn't intend to wake up. Eric smiled and his hand began to slide down. Jennifer Love Hewitt, who had wanted to continue pretending to be asleep, suddenly trembled. She clamped her legs together and looked up with a blush on her face. Eric, you're so naughty. Eric hugged Jennifer and felt her soft and tender body pressed against him. When girls say that, they usually want men to be naughty. Jennifer Love Hewitt weakly pressed down on Eric's mischievous hand and said unhappily, "Why don't you bully Sarah? She must be pretending to be asleep too." Eric turned his head to look at the girl on the other side, who was probably also pretending to be asleep. He rolled over with a smile and pressed Jennifer under his body. "No hurry, it's still early. Neither of you can escape." After breakfast and seeing the two girls off, Eric called Joss Whedon and asked him to cancel the audition for the male lead in Iron Man. At 10 o'clock in the morning, Eric arrived at Firefly Studios. Bridget Fonda, who had been confirmed to play Pepper, was also there. She was so surprised that her jaw almost fell off when she heard that Eric was going to play Tony Stark himself. It would definitely be ugly for a beauty to lose her chin, so Eric reached out and lifted Bridget Fonda's chin to make her shut up. He smiled and said, "Let's go. We'll go to the audition first. It's still not certain if we'll succeed." Bridget Fonda was very dissatisfied with Eric's actions, but the shock in her heart couldn't be calmed down in a short time. She obediently followed the crowd into an audition room. After a busy morning, Eric and Bridget Fonda performed most of Iron Man's scenes with Tony Stark and Pepper. In the end, everyone, including Katzenberg, Frank Wells, and the other Firefly executives who had been notified to join in the fun, unanimously felt that Tony Stark was simply tailor-made for Eric. During the audition process, Bridget Fonda, as a professional actress, sometimes couldn't even keep up with Eric's performance. After lunch, everyone gathered in the conference room again. Eric, who was sitting at the head of the table, looked at everyone and said, "In that case, let's discuss what to do next." Frank Wells and the others had already gone back to work, but Katzenberg didn't leave. He said, "Eric, I think that in order to ensure the success of Iron Man, you should reduce your exposure as much as possible. This way, you can avoid the impact of your inherent identity on your screen image to the greatest extent." "That's not a problem." Eric nodded. He didn't like to appear in the spotlight. It was better to be the mastermind behind the scenes. "Then, about me playing Tony Stark, let's wait until next year before the start of filming to announce it." Everyone nodded in agreement. It was now August 23rd, and the North American summer vacation was coming to an end. But at the same time, the most popular live-action blockbuster of the summer, Casino Royale, was also in its 9th week of release. Although this week, the expected box office of Casino Royale was less than $4 million and the film had entered the final stage in North America. After 8 weeks of screening, the North American box office of Casino Royale had accumulated to more than $363 million, which was almost the same as the $370 million estimated by most box office agencies. At the same time, the overseas box office of Casino Royale had also exceeded $470 million, and the global box office had accumulated to $830 million. With the arrival of the second stage of the overseas intensive screening of Casino Royale in September, it was only a matter of time before the global box office exceeded $1 billion. It could be said that Casino Royale was almost 100% locked in as the box office champion of 1997. Due to the influence of Casino Royale, even though Eric didn't like to appear in public, his presence in the hearts of the public had been very strong recently. In this case, it was naturally not appropriate to immediately announce the news that he would play Tony Stark. It was not unreasonable for most Hollywood stars to habitually keep a low profile. If the media exposure was too frequent, when the audience saw them on the big screen, it might be difficult for them to have a sense of identity with the character. After discussing the media operation surrounding Eric's participation in Iron Man, they naturally couldn't escape the issue of remuneration. Although Pierce Brosnan had caused a stir over the remuneration of 007's sequel, Eric himself was actually the one who received the most remuneration in the entire Casino Royale project team. His salary contract was a base salary of $8 million and a 10% share of the global box office. Although the share of the box office this time wasn't calculated according to the actual global box office, but rather 10% of the studio's share of the global box office that MGM received from the global box office, Eric's final remuneration would not be less than $50 million, given that Casino Royale's global box office was going to hit $1 billion worldwide. Of course, in the entire Hollywood, perhaps no one would think that Eric shouldn't be paid so much. Strictly speaking, Eric actually took the initiative to lower his remuneration standards. After all, if it was other Hollywood directors who made a movie with a global box office of $1 billion, they definitely wouldn't stop until they took $100 million. Now, Eric was going to change his identity to play Tony Stark. If they were serious, the remuneration was really difficult to calculate. Whether it was MGM or Firefly, although the control was firmly in the hands of Eric, the equity didn't completely belong to Eric alone. Therefore, even if he was shooting his own company's movie, his own interests and the company's interests still had to be clearly divided. Otherwise, he would inevitably encounter some unnecessary entanglements in the future. Eric naturally wouldn't waste too much time on this issue. He just signed a newcomer's contract according to the salary plan drawn up by Marvel Pictures in advance, and took $500,000 symbolically. As for the future, Eric also set the maximum salary of $20 million. This was the highest salary set by the Marvel system for its actors. It was related to the long-term plan of the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, so Eric naturally wouldn't take the initiative to break this limit. At the end of the day's meeting, when Eric and Katzenberg had dinner, he handed him another document that he had taken the time to write today. Katzenberg looked at the list in his hand and said, Garfield, Scooby-Doo, Teddy Bear, and Japanese horror movies. Eric, what do these mean? Copyright. Eric took a sip of red wine and said, I sorted it out in the past few days. You asked the copyright department to buy the copyright of the 3 animated toys, Garfield, Scooby-Doo, and Teddy Bear, as soon as possible. I plan to make a live-action and animation mixed movie just like Who Framed Roger Rabbit. However, this time, we will use 3D animation. As for Japanese-style horror films, I thought of this when I watched The Exorcist last night. Although teen horror films have become popular in recent years, films that can really bring fear to people will always be very popular. In this aspect, Japanese-style horror films are actually very good. So, send someone to Japan recently, and collect some scripts for Japanese horror movies. I'll see if there are any that I'm interested in. In fact, this document was thought of by Eric when he was with Sarah and Jennifer last night. Speaking of which, not only were the two girls similar in height, appearance, and temperament, but even their stardom in the original Spacetime was very similar. In addition to Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which brought Sarah Michelle Gellar more fame, the two girls starred in a series of teen horror movies in the late 1990s. Similarly, in the new millennium, one of them starred in Scooby-Doo, the other starred in Garfield, and then participated in several Japanese horror movies at the same time. These were all very good movies at the box office. Scooby-Doo and Garfield were already very classic cartoons. Teddy Bear was completely a bad taste that Eric came up with on the spur of the moment. He intended to ruin his childhood in advance. As for Japanese horror movies in his memory, the most classic Japanese horror movies such as Ring, Ju-on, and so on had not appeared yet. Eric simply asked Katzenberg to cast a wide net and go to Japan to search for horror movie scripts. It should be easy to find a few classics. After listening to Eric's explanation, Katzenberg recalled that Drew had been searching for the copyright of the script everywhere, and had even caused all the film companies in Hollywood to fight over it. The copyright of the script back then had almost become a blockbuster at the Hollywood box office. Carefully putting away the document in his hand, Katzenberg asked, "Eric, these should not be considered mainstream film genres. Do you, have a list similar to Drew's collection of copyrights?" Eric couldn't help but roll his eyes. He smiled and said, "Jeffrey, my energy is limited. I can't put my mind on these things all day long. Moreover, the copyright projects in our hands are enough to develop the Marvel series for decades. There are also Transformers, The Lord of the Rings, and the upcoming Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. I dare say that any one of these is almost enough for a film company to eat for 8 to 10 years. Katzenberg grinned and said, "Of course, but the more good projects there are, the better. Well, I will get someone to contact the copyright holders as soon as possible. Which of the 3 live-action animated movies do you plan to produce first? I personally participated in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. This type of movie needs to be prepared for a long time in advance." Eric only had some general impressions of Scooby-Doo and Garfield. The one he had really watched was Teddy Bear. However, he had some experience. Sequels of this type of movie were usually relatively poor at the box office because the audience would easily lose interest after watching the first movie. Then Teddy Bear. After thinking about it, Eric smiled and said to Katzenberg, "Buy the copyright first, and I will come up with a rough plan." After leaving the Sharp Corner Manor, Sarah Michelle Gellar and Jennifer Love Hewitt had been thinking for the next few days that perhaps the night with Eric was a dream. At least, the thrill was very good. Eric Williams even personally made breakfast for them. They naturally wanted to get something from Eric, but this kind of thing usually couldn't be said too straightforwardly. They also heard that many girls in Hollywood slept with directors or producers, but still got nothing. They wanted to calm themselves down as much as possible and treat it as a dream. However, on the 3rd day they still received good news. They received a notification from their agent that the 2 heroines of I Know What You Did Last Summer fell on them. Remembering that Eric said that the 2 of them were not suitable to appear in the same movie, the 2 girls naturally felt that this matter must be the result of Eric's intervention. But then, the 2 girls felt an inexplicable sense of loss in their hearts. Perhaps, after getting these 2 roles, Eric would definitely not have any contact with them in the future. After all, it was a deal. But this time the 2 girls guessed wrong. Eric devoted the following days to the audition for the supporting role in Iron Man, and unconsciously forgot about this matter. He thought about giving the 2 heroines of Garfield and Scooby-Doo to Jennifer and Sarah again in the future, but this was completely from the perspective that the 2 of them were really suitable for these films. Although there was never a shortage of crew members in Hollywood who used their roles to make certain transactions, Eric never had this kind of thought. After all, in order for a movie to be successful, this kind of self-control was necessary. If a movie's casting wasn't good, it would lose millions of dollars. Anyone who was slightly more rational in Hollywood would understand this. No woman was worth that much money. Chapter 9:15. On September 5th, with the release of Warner Brothers' action film Gun Down, starring Steven Seagal, the 1997 summer officially came to an end. Overall, the start of the summer was tragic. Crushed by Finding Nemo and Casino Royale, 2 blockbusters with box office potential of more than $300 million, the other big-budget films released in June were almost completely wiped out. Even The Lion King 2, which barely exceeded $200 million in North American box office by Paramount Pictures, could not be considered a success. However, in July, the chaos in the film market began to calm down. Fox's Ice Age, MGM's Scream 2, Universal's Air Force One, and other films all achieved very good box office results. Among them, the performance of Ice Age was undoubtedly the most eye-catching. This was not only because Ice Age finally grossed more than $176 million in North American box office at a cost of $59 million, but also because this 3D animated film was also the first animated feature film of Blue Sky Animation Studio. Although it was well known that Blue Sky Studio had received technical support from Firefly, it was still a great stimulus for other film companies to be able to receive good reviews in North America and triple the box office of its production cost as a first film. In addition to Casino Royale, this summer's most outstanding box office performance was The Lion King 2, Finding Nemo, and Ice Age, which were released one after another. Just these three animated films, the total summer box office was close to $600 million, which was almost a quarter of the total box office of the entire summer. Before the release of Ice Age, although several major Hollywood film companies began to establish their own animation film departments, due to the influence of the concept that 2D animation was monopolized by Disney and 3D animation was monopolized by Pixar, coupled with the long production cycle of animated films, these film companies felt that it was very difficult to produce a successful animated film. But now, whether it was the influence of Blue Sky Animation Studios' traditional thinking, or driven by strong interests, the other major Hollywood film companies began to increase their investment in their animation departments. On the other hand, the fierce battle in June also made Hollywood realize that they could no longer adhere to the traditional practice of putting the key films before July 4th, which would only cause very serious internal friction. The box office performance in the overseas market also further attracted Hollywood's attention. The two blockbusters of this year's box office were Finding Nemo and Casino Royale. Both of them had significantly exceeded the box office in the United States. While many media outlets were still exclaiming that Casino Royale had once again broken the box office record for the first week in North America, the film's box office in the first week had easily reached a high of $136 million. In its 13th week of release, Finding Nemo had accumulated a total of more than $330 million at the North American box office, and the overseas box office had also reached $390 million. At the same time, many overseas markets had yet to release the film, and there was still at least $200 million worth of box office potential to be tapped. It was far from the North American box office, which was already in its final stages. In September, the international box office of Titanic reached an amazing figure of $1,629.6 million. The total global box office of the film also broke through an unprecedented $2.23 billion. The 1948 Paramount Act and the subsequent rise of the television industry almost ended the American film industry during the golden age of Hollywood. But in recent years, with Hollywood movies frequently creating box office miracles around the world, the entire Hollywood gradually realized that another new golden age was coming for the American film industry. Moreover, this was an era accompanied by the rapid development of high-tech and economic globalization. If you couldn't keep up with these changes, you were destined to face the fate of being eliminated again. Among these changes, the biggest change was undoubtedly the rapid integration of several major media groups in North America. It had to be said that this was actually a very ironic thing. The Paramount Act in the past was to prevent a monopoly giant from having a negative impact on the entire industry. But the result of this move was a heavy blow to the American film industry. In recent years, the Paramount Act had only existed in name, and several major media giants had even reached out to the cinema industry, which was originally banned, but Hollywood had shown a rapid recovery because of this. With the end of the summer, Hollywood once again began two major events related to the integration of media groups. Viacom acquired the CBS network, and Seagram acquired the European music giant Polygram Group. Viacom's acquisition of CBS was almost a well-known matter in Hollywood. Since the 1980s, Sam Leigh-Chardon had been expanding Viacom's television business nonstop. Firefly and News Corporation jointly suppressed the publicity of The Lion King 2, causing the 2D animated film with a potential of $300 million in North American box office to stop at $200 million. This further stimulated Leigh-Chardon, who finally made up his mind to start the acquisition of CBS. Eric was very happy to see Viacom acquire CBS. The North American public television network had already shown signs of decline. In recent years, more and more cable TV stations had been taking away a large amount of market share. At the same time, due to the impact of the new technology wave, the market value of CBS also inflated several times. It could be said that at this time, even without the memory of his previous life, Eric could determine that this public television network would become a big burden for Viacom. However, Seagram's acquisition of Polygram was beyond Eric's expectations. This matter was exposed when a reporter from a European newspaper happened to take a photo of Seagram's CEO, Edgar Bronfman, meeting with Polygram executives. When Seagram acquired Universal's parent company, MCA, it already owned Universal Records, which was very powerful in North America. If it acquired Polygram, the largest record company in Europe, Universal Records' strength would far surpass the other top record companies in the world. Okay, I'll send a plane to pick you up in Brisbane, but don't be too ostentatious. Also, shouldn't you kiss? Well, good girl, but I think I kissed your feet again. Haha, okay, stop messing around. In the conference room of Firefly Studios, Eric put his feet on the desk and leaned back in the boss chair. He was on the phone with Miranda Kerr, who was far away in Australia. The office door was pushed open and Elizabeth walked in without knocking. Well, that's it then. I have a guest. I'll hang up first, bye. Elizabeth suspiciously glanced at Eric's face as he hung up the phone in a hurry. She didn't find anything unusual, so she curled her lips and sat across from him. She picked up a pile of documents on Eric's desk and flipped through them. Putting the phone on the desk, Eric sat up straight and looked at Elizabeth, who was flipping through a thick stack of documents. Are you blatantly being a commercial spy? Elizabeth didn't even raise her head and said, Humph, I'm not going to hold you accountable for talking on the phone with those little foxes. How dare you be so self-righteous? I've been planning to make self-righteousness my motto recently. Eric smiled as he took out a pencil from the pen holder and corrected a script in front of him. The script in his hand was Desperate Housewives, which he happened to remember a few days ago. Eric spent a few hours writing a simple script idea, and then threw it to the original screenwriter of Desperate Housewives, Mark Chelly. Mark Chelly was just a very inconspicuous person in Hollywood, so he was naturally conscientious. He quickly wrote the complete story outline for the first season, and the script for the first 3 episodes. Just as he wrote a few lines on the script of Desperate Housewives, Elizabeth, who was sitting across from him, burst out laughing. Eric raised his head and said, You're very scary. What if you scare me into writing a horror movie script? I'll have to spend a lot of effort to write it. Elizabeth tossed the stack of documents back onto the desk, leaving only one folder. She waved it, unable to suppress the smile on her face, and said, the script of Teddy Bear is really too vulgar. Who wrote it? Eric pointed at himself with the pencil and said, Recently, I've been bursting with inspiration. I can't stop myself. Elizabeth subconsciously rolled her eyes, waved the folder in her hand and said, I want it. Come over here and lie on the desk. I'll give it to you. Bah, you bastard. Nothing good ever comes out of your head. No wonder you wrote such a vulgar script. Elizabeth picked up a small ornament next to the monitor and threw it at Eric. Eric reached out and caught the Resident Evil, Ida Wong figurine with the crossbow. He carefully put it away and said, This is a limited edition. If you break it, I can only put you on the desk as compensation. Elizabeth snorted again and waved the teddy bear script in her hand. She didn't mention the matter of asking for it anymore. She only said, Teddy bears are a plush toy that many children like. If you write such nonsense, will the copyright owner be willing? Generally, when the copyright owner is unwilling, I think there are only 2 reasons. One is that they didn't give enough money, and the other is that they didn't give enough money, Eric said with a smile. Anyway, Firefly has already signed the copyright agreement with them. How we write the script has nothing to do with them. I don't even need to think to know that they must have been deceived by you. They must think that you want to make Teddy Bear into a Disney-style children's story. If they knew in advance that the script would be so vulgar, they probably wouldn't have sold it even if they were beaten to death. Eric smiled and said, That's not necessarily the case. It still depends on whether they give enough money. However, when this movie is produced, it will definitely be R-rated. Children won't be able to watch it at all, so it won't affect them much. Okay, what's the matter? Don't tell me you suddenly missed me so much that you ran over here. If I remember correctly, we just met the night before yesterday? Who would miss you? Elizabeth pouted and took out a folder from her handbag. This is the script for Shrek that Chris Wedge and the others have just completed. Help me take a look. Eric reached out and took it. He opened it and said, "Why didn't you send it directly to my email? Wouldn't it be more convenient? Everyone is in a hurry. Who knows when you will reply if I send it over by email? I don't plan to leave this afternoon. Help me finish reading it and give me your suggestions." And that's all. Okay. Eric smiled and nodded. Then help me make a cup of coffee first. Add a piece of sugar and more milk. Elizabeth pretended to grab the Ada Wong figurine before standing up and walking out of Eric's office. After a while, she placed the coffee in front of Eric and said, "Didn't you say that Seagram wants to buy the polygram? Don't you feel anything at all?" Eric twirled the pencil in his hand and asked casually, "What do I feel? If I say yes, have you ever thought of snatching the polygram?" Recently, there have been more comments attacking the Fireflyer player for condoning music piracy. I only know that Firefly Records' performance will increase by more than 50% this year. Although digital music only accounts for 10% of the revenue, they are smart enough to know where the industry's development trend is in the future. When it comes to new technology, forcefully blocking it will only lead to self-destruction. Perhaps Siemens wants to sell the polygram now because they are considering the rise of digital music in the next few years. Then Seagram is an idiot. Can't they see this? It's not about being an idiot. Edgar Bronfman was able to snatch the position of CEO from his family. I don't think he's too stupid. Of course, I don't think he's too smart either. It's just that, like Lei Sherdong, many people only see the short-term benefits in front of them and don't want to think too far ahead. Elizabeth nodded thoughtfully and said with a smile, "You're thinking very far ahead. Firefly hasn't expanded in the past 2 years. I'm afraid the annual growth rate will drop very soon." Eric wrote another line on the script in his hand and continued, "Even if Firefly's performance stops growing, it's enough for the other Hollywood studios to catch up for a few years. Moreover, it's not certain if it will stop growing. It's not like you don't know about the economic bubble in the past few years. Firefly isn't a listed company and can't enjoy too much of the dividends from the bubble. Therefore, expanding now is not a wise thing to do. After 2 years, when the bubble bursts, it'll be time for Firefly to show its strength." Then what do you think of Seagram's acquisition of the polygram? Eric remembered that in the original space-time, the media companies had been integrated. Only the global media group was still changing owners after entering the new century. He said, "I can only say that once Seagram completes the acquisition of the polygram, this company will become a hot potato in the future. Whoever takes it will be unlucky." Chapter 916. In history, after Seagram acquired Polygram, the company had to sell itself to the French Vivendi Group a few years later, because the company could not bear the high debt and the overall decline of the recording industry. Vivendi Group took over Seagram and ended up with a huge loss in less than 2 years. They sold all of their entertainment business to General Electric. General Electric integrated the original NBC network with them to form the NBC Universal Group, which covered television, film, music, and other businesses. However, a few years later, General Electric sold NBC Universal to Comcast. It could be said that the former NBC Universal Group was still changing owners frequently even when other media groups had gradually stabilized. Edgar Bronfman's bad move to acquire Polygram Records was definitely indispensable. After listening to Eric's analysis, Elizabeth said, "So, you've decided not to expand the recording industry? Firefly Records is enough for Firefly. According to the current development trend, in 4 or 5 years, the Fireflyer player may bring more profits to Firefly Electronics than the total annual profits of the entire recording industry. If we increase the proportion of the group's recording business, Firefly Electronics will have to consider balancing the interests of all sides. This will hinder the development of Firefly Electronics." Elizabeth nodded in understanding and smiled. "Oh, I thought you guys liked the bigger the better." Eric looked up and glanced at Elizabeth's chest and said regretfully, "Of course, the bigger the better. Unfortunately, reality is too cruel. I'm going to hit you. Hurry up and show me the script." Elizabeth raised her small fist in anger. However, after a few seconds, she leaned over the desk and whispered, "Hey, how much money did you make in Southeast Asia this time?" After the loss of the Thai baht in July, the currencies of Malaysia, the Philippines, Indonesia, Singapore, and other Southeast Asian countries all plummeted in August. Among them, the Indonesian rupiah depreciated even more than the Thai baht. Now, a lot of foreign exchange contracts have not been settled. If we only count the profits on paper, it should be about $600 million US. Chris has already started to build Korean won. When the time comes, we can make another profit, Eric said and looked at Elizabeth. What about you? Eric did not hide the operation of the Southeast Asian currencies from the people around him. He even deliberately encouraged Elizabeth to participate. However, they did not gather together as it would be too conspicuous. Eric did not want the governments of various countries in Southeast Asia to take turns finding trouble with Firefly Group. Elizabeth also knew how much capital Eric had invested. She said in surprise, "How did you guys earn so much?" "I borrowed $100 million from my dad and pooled some money together with Julia. We had a total of $150 million, but we only made less than $80 million. $80 million US is already not bad. You guys entered the market a little late, and the profit is more than 50%. This means that the trader you found is still very capable." Eric flipped another page of the script in front of him, raised his head and said, "From what you said, you have already recovered all the funds?" "Yes, many people say that the Southeast Asian currency will rebound soon. So Julia and I don't dare to continue. However, there shouldn't be too much of a possibility for Korean won to plummet. Why are you betting on this?" Eric smiled. "Apart from Japan, Korea is the fattest fish in Southeast Asia. Do you think everyone will let it go? Maybe, but Julia and I have already bought all the $80 million into stocks. We can't go back even if we want to." Elizabeth shrugged and said with a smile, "Yes, by the way, we also ordered a Boeing 747-400. If the Nasdaq index doesn't continue to rise like you said, you will have to pay for it." Eric said helplessly, "Two is enough for everyone. Why buy so many?" "I don't care. Of those two, one is yours, one is Drew's. Of course, Julia and I will have one too. Anyway, it's just $80 million. Elizabeth showed a little unruly expression and said, "If we can't pay the balance, I will give Julia to Boeing. You can go and redeem it." The Nasdaq index was far from reaching its limit. It would not be a problem for it to rise a few times in the future. Eric was not worried that the $80 million they invested now would not be enough to pay for a Boeing 747. He just said in a bad mood, "You might as well give yourself to Boeing." As they chatted and occasionally bickered, Eric went through the script of Shrek in detail and changed some details according to his memory. When it was almost time to get off work, Eric handed the script to Elizabeth and said, "That's all for now. I will go to New York in 2 days. I will personally go to Blue Sky Studio and take a look at the settings and storyboards they came up with." Elizabeth put the script away and asked curiously, "What are you going to do in New York?" "This year's Victoria's Secret fashion show will start after Fashion Week. They asked me to go and take a look. There are some other trivial matters. I will stay in New York for a few days, and then fly to London." Eric tidied up the documents on the table and stuffed them into the safe. He picked up the landline on the table and said hello to Carolyn and the rest. He got up and said, "Let's go and eat." Elizabeth picked up her bag and held Eric's arm as they walked out of the office. She thought of something and asked, "Then you don't have time for the Emmy Awards?" Eric shook his head and said, "There's no hurry. I will leave after the Emmy Awards." In September, with the arrival of the autumn TV series, the most important TV show awards in the United States, the Emmy Awards, would be held during this time. Eric did not pay much attention to the Emmy Awards in the past. However, as the Firefly TV business expanded, he began to put more effort into this aspect. After a fruitful summer, the TV shows under the Firefly Group also shone in this year's Emmy Awards. Whether it was TVB's Friends, Emergency Room Story, Survivor, or cable TV's City to Prosperity, Project Runway and other shows, they all received a large number of nominations. Under the management of Harvey Weinstein, FFM's Machida Family, received 16 nominations and became the most dazzling new star in this year's Emmy Awards. The Emmy Awards ceremony was held on September 8 at the City Hall in Pasadena, northeast of Los Angeles. This was a 20-year tradition of the Emmy Awards. The Emmy Awards started early and the entire ceremony only lasted 2 hours. When the ceremony ended, it was only 8 o'clock in the evening in the western United States. In the end, Machida Family won 7 awards in the drama category, including Best Drama Series, Best Actor, and Best Actress with 16 nominations. It was the biggest winner of this year's Emmy Awards. The celebration party was held at the Sunset Tower Hotel on Sunset Boulevard. Eric did not attend the Emmy Awards ceremony in person. He only came to Firefly's celebration party after the ceremony ended. Although FFM-TV was under the management of Harvey Weinstein, the control was still in Firefly's hands. Therefore, the celebration party for Machida Family was not separated. When he walked into the banquet hall, Harvey Weinstein was the first to greet him. He hugged Eric and teased him. "Hey Eric, you came alone again tonight?" Eric was used to attending all kinds of events alone. It was not the first time he heard Harvey's teasing. However, when he heard Harvey's words, Eric suddenly remembered something. He subconsciously scanned the banquet hall. Before Eric could discover anything, Robert Iger and Sweeney, and the others who came from New York came over and blocked Eric's view. Eric could only smile and greet them one by one. How long would it take to forget someone? The real answer was that it was impossible as long as you were alive. The only thing she could do was to make herself not care. The last time was when she secretly gave him a tie. She did not sign it, so she did not get a response. She cried the whole night and decided to forget that guy. For 6 years, although they lived in the same city, she had always tried to make herself and him as two parallel lines. She thought that she would slowly become indifferent. However, he did appear at the Emmy Awards celebration party, which she originally thought he would not attend. Thus, she became absent-minded all of a sudden. She couldn't help but look in his direction. She saw him being surrounded by people, talking and laughing with others, weaving in and out of the crowd to socialize, and seeing him walking towards her. "Hi, Ann." Eric greeted the rest of the cast of Friends, before turning to Jennifer Aniston. However, his eyes curiously glanced at the tall man standing next to Jennifer Aniston. He was naturally a little disappointed, but also a little curious. He vaguely remembered that this person seemed to have appeared in a movie before, but he could not recall it at the moment. "Jenny, it's Jenny." Who abbreviates someone's last name as a nickname? You used to get it wrong all the time. Seeing his casual look, Jennifer Aniston also wanted to act more natural. She looked straight at him and raised her free left hand. However, she did not dare to reach out because she remembered that her boyfriend was next to her. Therefore, she instinctively raised her hand and grabbed his arm. "Well, I have a boyfriend too, you guy." She thought this in her heart, but her outstretched arm grabbed nothing. She turned her head and happened to see the man next to her deliberately dodge. His expression was obviously guilty, as if he wanted to draw a line between them. She was stunned for a few seconds, and a strong sense of grievance suddenly surged up. Coward, bastard, traitor, coward. Why am I so unlucky? She wanted to pour the glass of champagne in her hand over, but suddenly she lost all her strength. The glass fell to the ground, and she squatted on the ground and cried. It was a mess. The sudden change of events made the entire hall suddenly quiet down. I'm sorry, Mr. Williams." The man standing next to Jennifer Aniston also woke up at this time. He apologized to Eric, but he stood there helplessly. "Go, don't stay here anymore." Eric glanced at the man and ignored him. He handed the glass of champagne in his hand to the person next to him. He squatted down and looked at the girl who buried her head and cried unscrupulously. He reached out and carried her out of the banquet hall. Robert Iger followed and looked at Jennifer Aniston, who was curled up in Eric's arms, and whispered, "Eric, what's going on?" Eric did not answer, but said, "You arrange it. I don't want to see a word about this in the newspaper tomorrow." Robert Iger had a headache. It was not easy to cover up such a big commotion. However, he noticed that Eric's expression did not leave any room for negotiation. So he still forced himself to say, "Okay." When they came to the parking lot, he asked the bodyguards to get out of the car. Eric put the girl in the passenger seat and personally drove away from the Sunset Tower Hotel. After a while, the girl, who was curled up in the leather seat, finally stopped crying, but she did not dare to look up. She asked in a low voice, Where are you taking me?" "I'll take you home." "Where do you live now?" "I'm not going back." "Okay," Eric responded and continued to drive. There was another silence. Jennifer Aniston's chin was on her knees, and she quietly looked at the lights passing by outside the car window. She suddenly said, "This is Bel Air." Eric also looked out. The Bel Air community was also a wealthy area comparable to Beverly Hills. Diamonds brilliant in Bel Air. Chick softly recited the lyrics of Young and Beautiful, and said, "It's this Bel Air." Eric nodded, "Yeah. I really don't know how a hateful guy like you can write such a good song. Maybe I copied it." The girl snorted and said, "How can someone who can write such a song let you copy it?" "Well, this process is a bit sci-fi. You're going to start talking nonsense again." "Did I often talk nonsense before?" Who knows, I almost forgot all about it." You jumped out again. "My public relations manager is probably going crazy now." The girl obviously didn't hear his instructions to Robert Iger, and Eric didn't explain. He nodded and said, "Well, my mind is full of news headlines. Why don't we discuss it and take the initiative to occupy the headlines?" Jennifer Aniston turned her head and looked at Eric in the driver's seat. She opened her mouth, hesitated, and said, "When you started talking nonsense, I knew it was okay. Now that you've recovered, I'll take you home. Is a woman like me very troublesome?" Eric shook his head. "It's not troublesome at all. If I want, there's a 90% chance that I can coax you to bed again tonight." Jennifer Aniston stared at Eric angrily. "Be careful, I'll die with you. Are you hungry?" This turn of events was a bit sudden. The girl blinked her eyes. She was inexplicably relieved that he still knew to ask her this kind of question, so she nodded honestly, "Hungry." "Well, that's good. People in a hungry state have very weak willpower. So you don't have the courage to die with me now." The girl blinked her eyes again and shouted, "Stop the car." Eric helplessly drove the car to the side of the road, looked at the scattered street lights on the side of the road, and said, "This is not a residential area. It's dangerous to park here. Maybe we'll encounter a perverted murderer." But the girl didn't care. As soon as the car stopped, she rushed over. Her fist smashed Eric's body a few times, and then she unwillingly opened her mouth and bit Eric's shoulder. "I'm now just bite you to death." Chapter 9:17. Mulholland Road almost traversed the entire Santa Monica Mountains. 2 luxury cars were quietly parked on the side of the road between the top of the mountain and the tip of Malibu. It was already early in the morning. At the top of a hill near the road, Eric was lying on a camping mat. He rested his head on his arm and looked at the sky gradually turning from gray to blue. The surroundings were empty and quiet. Although there was a meadow below, the ground was not flat. Jennifer Aniston, who was in his arms, instinctively looked for a more comfortable place, so she rubbed most of her body against him in her sleep. Jennifer Aniston's public breakdown last night made Eric feel very guilty, so he did his best to let her vent the anger accumulated over the past few years. He was pinched and bitten by her in the car, and driven to wander on the long Mulholland Road. It was already late at night when they arrived at the top of Malibu Mountain. Eric wanted to drive back to the Sharp Corner Manor, but the girl said she wanted to stay at the top of the mountain to watch the sunrise. Eric naturally agreed, so he asked the bodyguard to go back and get some camping equipment and food, and accompanied the girl to climb to the top of the mountain. After crying and complaining that she was tired, Jennifer Aniston reluctantly stayed up until 2 in the morning and fell asleep. Perhaps it was tempted by the smell of last night's food. A little squirrel jumped out of the nearby bushes, picked up a small piece of chocolate and greedily ate it. After eating it in 2 or 3 bites, it naturally wanted more, so it sniffed its little nose and dug into a bag of snacks. Eric was just quietly watching the little guy steal food, but he didn't expect the little guy to be so arrogant and make a noise in the bag. Worried that Jennifer Aniston would be woken up, Eric carefully reached out and gently flicked the little guy's big furry tail. The frightened little guy suddenly jumped forward, making a bigger noise. It got out of the bag and ran away in a panic for a long time before it stopped and cautiously looked back at Eric. It was obviously unwilling to leave. The sudden movement in the tranquil atmosphere woke the chick up. After a short moment of confusion, she recalled everything. She remembered how she had tormented Eric last night, and suddenly regretted it. Was she too willful? Not daring to raise her head to look at Eric's reaction, Jennifer Aniston's small hand reached out from the blanket wrapped around them. She slid her hand under Eric's shirt collar and touched the shoulder that she had bitten last night. She could clearly feel the blood on her fingertips and even the scabs formed after the blood flowed out. Eric naturally reached out and hugged the girl's slender waist. The silk dress from last night was still on her body, and it felt very smooth to the touch. Although he joked last night that he had a 90% chance of coaxing the girl back to bed, Eric didn't do anything. However, feeling the movement of the chick, Eric habitually teased. "What's wrong? You just woke up and you can't wait to take advantage of me?" Jennifer Aniston's fingertip movement paused, but she didn't withdraw her hand. She moved her body and lay on top of Eric's body. Her face was stuck on his chest. Listening to the strong heartbeat, she murmured, "Eric, I don't know what to do." "If you don't know what to do, then put it aside and do what you can do." Jennifer Aniston wrinkled her nose. "Do you say this kind of brainwashing words to all the women around you?" "No, I'm actually very lazy." "Aha, you didn't even bother to look for me for 6 years. I thought you didn't want to see me again in your life. You're just quibbling." I don't think so." That tie. "Oh, I remember that day I received 7 ties. It should be 7, maybe 8. The chick was speechless for a moment and bitterly said, "I really want to bite you again." The golden sun slowly spread on the two of them. Eric's palm gently rubbed the chick's slender waist and said, "It's already dawn. Let's go down the mountain. You can slowly bite me when we get home." Jennifer Aniston suddenly remembered something. She looked around and moved Eric's wrist to look at the watch. "It's already 7 o'clock. Where are we? I still have to shoot today." With the arrival of the autumn, the new season of Friends had already started shooting. Eric naturally knew about this. He gently patted Jennifer Aniston and said, "It doesn't matter, the boss of the production company and the TV station are here. It would be a waste if you don't use such a powerful excuse. I don't want to do this, but last night I was like that, they. The chick muttered in her mouth and slumped on Eric's body again. Eric continued to hug the soft body of the chick and said with a smile, "Yeah, what should I do? How about I build a cabin here, and you can live here in seclusion in the future? You have so much money now, but you only want to build a cabin? You're too stingy." The chick rubbed her body and bargained. "At least it should be a castle, like Hearst Castle." Hearst Castle was built for 30 years. Old William Hearst didn't finish building it until he died. "Are you sure you can wait that long?" "Of course I'm very patient. But I don't have that kind of patience." Eric smiled and turned over with Jennifer Aniston in his arms. He kissed her sweet face a few times and said, "Okay, let's go. I told them last night, no one dares to say anything." Suddenly pressed down by Eric, Jennifer Aniston whispered twice in response to Eric's kiss. She unconsciously reached out and hugged his waist. You, if you can be more focused, you will be the most perfect man in the world. Why can't you be more focused?" Eric leaned down again and kissed the chick's lips. He smiled and said, "I didn't expect you to think so highly of me. However, there is no such thing as a perfect person in this world." Eric paused as he said this. He put away his joking expression and said, "Moreover, you may already know that I have 2 children now." Jennifer Aniston nodded sadly. She forced a smile and mocked, "Of course I know. I also know that you named your daughter Hawaii. It's really, really messy. Only a father like you would give such a messy name to a child." "What's wrong with Hawaii? I think it's quite good." It's not good at all. In the future, Jennifer Aniston immediately stopped speaking. She avoided his eyes and her face became red. Eric couldn't help but want to take a bite. Eric smiled and nodded. "Of course, when we have children in the future, I will definitely let you name them." Who wants to Who wants to give birth to your children? Jennifer Aniston reached out her small hand and pushed Eric's head away. She said shyly, "After what happened last night, do you think you can still find another man?" "You egomaniac." Jennifer Aniston glared at Eric with dissatisfaction. However, when she thought of what happened last night, she suddenly became sad again. She hugged Eric tightly and murmured, You in the future, in the future, in the future, you can't bully me anymore." "Well, I promise. And you are not allowed to make me sad again." "No problem. You are not allowed to bring other women to me." "Okay. You are not allowed to talk about us to others." "Definitely. You are not allowed to touch other women." Come on, let's renegotiate from you this guy." Jennifer Aniston raised her small fist and punched Eric. In the blink of an eye, she took the initiative to kiss Eric and said, "Okay, you bastard, I didn't say the last one. Let's go down the mountain, I have to go shoot." "I was serious. How about you rest for a few days? I will take you to New York to watch the Fashion Week and buy some beautiful clothes." "No, the crew has already started work. Even if you don't care about the money, I can't let everyone wait for me." Seeing the girl's insistence, Eric had to give up. He stood up and walked down the mountain with her. The things left here would naturally be cleaned up by the bodyguards. After leaving the Emmy celebration party last night, Eric directly turned off his mobile phone. He went down the mountain and had breakfast with Jennifer Aniston. After sending her off, Eric turned on his phone again, and it showed a long list of missed calls. Although Robert Iger and the others arranged for there to be no news about last night's incident in today's newspaper, the people around Eric obviously knew what they should and shouldn't know. After returning a few simple calls, Eric put this matter aside and began his day's work step by step. Machida won the Emmy Awards ceremony last night. Although it was inevitable that today's media would report about the brothers Wayne and Stan manipulating the Emmy Awards, because of the excellent quality of Machida, these comments did not cause much of a stir. FFM-TV took this opportunity to announce that their second self-produced drama, Prison, would be broadcast soon. At the same time, they also started the release of Machida on video and DVD. In September, the summer vacation for North America's primary and secondary school students came to an end. However, because North America did not have a unified summer vacation, each school's start time was different. Miranda Kerr returned to Australia during the summer vacation, and school was about to start. Eric couldn't stand the girl's coquettish behavior, so he sent the Boeing 767 to Brisbane to pick her up and return to Los Angeles. He planned to fly to New York after the Boeing 767 returned to Los Angeles. Eric received a call from Larry Ellison from San Francisco. The acquisition negotiations with the Apple Board of Directors were in the final stage. The other party wanted him to personally attend the final negotiation meeting, so Eric had to leave for San Francisco. In San Jose, south of San Francisco, Eric took his entourage out of the San Jose airport. Larry Ellison, who was waiting outside, greeted him. Larry Ellison put his arm around Eric's shoulder and did not talk about the acquisition of Apple. Instead, he asked, "Eric, why is there no news about the male lead in Iron Man? I've been waiting to see which guy is lucky enough to have me as his driver." Eric ignored the guy's arrogant tone. He got into the car brought by Larry Ellison and said, "You'll know when the shooting starts next year." "Hey, I spent $5 million US. If the role you choose is not good, I have the right to refuse to do the advertising." The two cars left the parking lot one after another. Eric suddenly regretted not kicking the guy into the car behind him. He shook his head and said, "No, Larry, you don't have the right. The contract has been signed." Larry Ellison really wanted to show his face in a Hollywood blockbuster, but he was still a little sad that the $5 million US that Eric took from him was gone. His face twitched and he changed the topic. He said, "Apple's chairman Ed Woolard and CEO Jill Amelio are waiting for us at the Apple headquarters in Palo Alto. Steve is also there. The price we finally agreed on is a 15% premium over the recent week's average share price. The transaction amount is $2.45 billion US. Eric roughly calculated in his mind. The price was not high, so he nodded and said, "Since you guys have already discussed it, why did you ask me to come over?" I think you can call Chris. My shares will still be under Firefly Investments. I called. Hansen seems to be very busy, and Larry Ellison rubbed his hands and said, he said that there are some things that you can do better. Eric heard Larry Ellison's tone and had a hunch that they did not call him over for anything good. Sure enough, when he arrived at the Apple headquarters, Steve Jobs, who had obviously entered the state of mind in advance, bluntly asked Eric to reopen the licensing of ARM technology to Apple. He also took out a large stack of documents to prove that Firefly Electronics had violated the contract by forcing Apple to give up the ARM chip technology during the acquisition of ARM. In order to develop the mobile chip for the Newton tablet computer, Apple deliberately injected $5 million into ARM and became one of the major shareholders of ARM. After Firefly Electronics acquired ARM, ARM gradually withdrew or stopped licensing ARM chip technology to the outside world. After a few years of operation, only Nokia, Qualcomm, and Firefly Electronics, as the parent company, were left with the licensing of ARM chip technology. In the conference room, Eric flipped through the pile of documents in front of him with a half-smile and looked at Steve Jobs. Steve, you asked me to come over just for this trivial matter? Of course not. Steve Jobs glanced around the conference room and pointed to the 7 or 8 Apple directors around him. I want all of them to resign after the deal is over, and you have to promise not to interfere in any of Apple's affairs. Eric noticed that everyone looked at Steve Jobs as if he was crazy, and then looked at him for help. He did not know whether to laugh or cry. You asked me to back you up and get rid of these people, and then you want to kick me out of the decision-making team. Do you think this is reasonable? Steve Jobs said with a face full of righteousness. This is my condition for returning to Apple. Eric shrugged, looked at everyone and said, in that case you can all resign. Apple CEO Ed Woolard was a little agitated. Eric, you can't do this. With a smile on his face, Eric put his hands on the wide conference table and said in a somewhat joking tone, as you can see, it's not fun to work with a crazy person. Apple may go bankrupt one day, and then you will leave in an even more embarrassing situation. So, take the opportunity to leave now. This way you won't lose a single cent of your compensation. The decision to sell Apple as a whole had been approved by the shareholders' meeting. Although they were still Apple directors, they could not mess up the deal in order to keep their positions. Although the leader of the acquisition of Apple was Larry Ellison on the surface, many of the capital forces involved in the investment were involved because of Firefly's investment in Apple. As the core of Firefly's system, Eric's words were definitely more powerful than Larry Ellison and Steve Jobs combined. Everyone thought that Eric would come and stop Jobs' messy actions. They did not expect him to react this way, and the last glimmer of hope in their hearts was shattered. However, several of the directors also felt that what Eric said was very reasonable. Although there was still some reluctance in their expressions, they still nodded in agreement. Several other people looked at the situation and reluctantly agreed. Chapter 9:18. When Steve Jobs heard that Eric would fulfill his request and let all the existing board members resign, his expression did not relax. He was still a little aggressive. Then Eric, what about the licensing of the ARM architecture? Eric knew very well what kind of person Steve Jobs was. This kind of person had a strong desire for control. If you responded to his emotions, you would be unknowingly influenced by him. Eric relaxed in his office chair and shook his head. Steve, I can't agree to this request. However, as a shareholder of Apple, if Apple needs to use ARM chips in the future, Firefly Electronics will naturally not refuse. The ARM chip technology was related to Eric's layout for the entire smartphone era in the future. Eric planned to let Qualcomm, Yahoo, Firefly Electronics, and Nokia form the strategic structure of manufacturers such as Intel, Microsoft, and IBM to completely monopolize the entire smartphone industry chain. In order to complete this layout, it was necessary to prevent ARM technology from spreading everywhere like in the original universe. If the ARM mobile chips in the Firefly system could reach Intel's dominant position in the PC chip market, even if Apple wanted to make smartphones in the future, It would have to purchase chips from manufacturers in the Firefly system. In history, the reason why Apple's mobile phone occupied more than 90% of the smartphone market's profits was not only because of its high-end products, but also because of the fierce internal competition under the Android platform. This was the main reason why manufacturers using this system were not profitable. As long as the Firefly system could master the core chip technology and operating system, and achieve a monopoly position in the smartphone market in advance, it could avoid the recurrence of fierce competition or limit the competition to the manufacturers at the bottom of the chain. In this way, the Firefly system could safely enjoy the richest and most stable pieces of meat in the smartphone industry. Steve Jobs was still a little unforgiving. "Eric, if you refuse to open the ARM licensing to Apple, Apple will sue based on the evidence we have in our hands." In the conference room, when they heard Steve Jobs' words, everyone looked at Jobs strangely. Even Larry Ellison, who was sitting next to Eric, could not help but give a look to his friend. Eric had simply kicked out all the original board members of Apple, which had helped them solve the biggest obstacle to controlling Apple. Now they were still fixated on such a small matter. Wasn't this looking for trouble? Larry Ellison could not help but feel that Jobs was being unappreciative of what he was doing. "Whether you want to sue or not, that's your business," Eric said nonchalantly. "But Steve, if I were you, I wouldn't waste time on this kind of thing. What you should be thinking about now is how to bring Apple back to life." In addition, Eric looked at the members of Apple's original board of directors and said, "Although they have left, the new board of directors, Firefly Investment still wants its seat and corresponding voting rights. There is no room for negotiation. Don't threaten me with words like this is your condition for taking over Apple. Steve, to be honest, I don't care if you are willing to take over Apple again. On the contrary, everyone knows that in this meeting room, the one who cares about Apple the most is you. Now, do you have any other questions?" Steve Jobs' face was cloudy for a while. When everyone thought he was going to go berserk, Jobs stared at Eric and said again, "Apple doesn't have enough liquidity on its books. I need $300 million. Larry raised a total of $2.5 billion. After buying Apple, there is still $50 million left. I will inform everyone that this money does not need to be returned to the investors. Firefly Investment will make up another $50 million. I will give you $100 million first. The release of Yahoo's software on operating systems other than the Windows platform has been delayed, and it is very imperfect. I want the Apple operating system to be treated the same as Microsoft. I can't guarantee that Yahoo's software will be synchronized with Microsoft's on the Apple operating system, but I will instruct them to improve the imperfect areas. Anything else?" Steve Jobs thought for a while and shook his head. "That's it then. I have to go to Oakland to take a look." "I'll leave first," Eric said, nodded to the others, got up, and walked out of the meeting room. Larry Ellison gave Jobs a look. Seeing that he did not move, he reluctantly got up and sent Eric away. In the meeting room, the others also got up and prepared to leave. Jobs was still sitting in his chair like a wooden sculpture. He watched Eric's figure disappear with a complicated look in his eyes. With the rise of Silicon Valley, a large number of billionaires who relied on high-tech industries to accumulate hundreds of millions of assets emerged. Atherton, northwest of Palo Alto, gradually became one of the most well-known wealthy areas in San Francisco. Near evening, in a mansion in the Atherton community with lush trees and pleasant scenery, Carolyn politely sent several cleaning company employees away. Back in the living room, Melanie was standing in front of a fax machine receiving information from Los Angeles, but her eyes were fixed on a long solid wood table next to her. "May, what are you looking at?" Carolyn came over and helped Melanie sort out the information. At the same time, she curiously followed Melanie's gaze and looked at the table. "You see," Melanie pointed to the long table and said, "most of the decorations in this house are warm colors. Although this table is pale yellow in color, it looks more like a cool color." Carolyn was even more puzzled. "What's wrong?" "I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Didn't our boss say that because his obsession with cleanliness was getting worse and worse, he didn't want to stay in hotels anymore, so he bought this house? Cleanliness is actually a kind of obsessive-compulsive disorder," Melanie said. Think about it. Won't he be very uncomfortable when he sees this table? Carolyn smiled and said, Eric isn't such a harsh person. This has nothing to do with whether the boss is harsh or not. This is an illness. Didn't someone say that the boss is very similar to Howard Hughes in the past? Howard Hughes' obsession with cleanliness was getting worse and worse due to his obsessive-compulsive disorder. In the end, he couldn't even eat and slowly died. Carolyn's face suddenly showed a worried look. She walked around the table and said, It shouldn't be that serious, right? Melanie smiled and walked over. She pointed to a spot next to the fruit plate on the table and said, This table may not be much, but you see there's a scratch here. Although it's only a short scratch, it's very obvious. Hee, when the boss comes back, I'll point it out to him. After that, we'll be able to enjoy his restless appearance. Carolyn picked up the fruit plate and placed it on top of the scratch. After that, she raised her small face and said to Melanie, May, you're not allowed to tease Eric like that. Melanie looked at the fruit plate that had left the center of the table, and a sly smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. She nodded and said, Okay, I won't say anything. However, I'm helping you vent your anger. That fellow clearly doesn't want to take responsibility for you, but he still keeps you by his side. He's really too hateful. Carolyn organized the information in her hands and shook her head. I don't want Eric to take responsibility for me. I'm not a child. Poor little Carolyn. Melanie walked over and hugged Carolyn. After that, the two of them organized the documents that had just been sent over from Los Angeles. These were all personal resumes. After Melanie and Carolyn left Eric's assistant office and became his personal assistants, the two girls' original positions had become vacant and needed to be filled up. The two girls organized and bound more than a dozen personal resumes together at the table. Melanie suddenly took out one of them and stared at the photo on the resume. She clicked her tongue and said, This is really beautiful. Carolyn, for your own consideration, I suggest that you secretly throw this resume away. Carolyn helplessly snatched the resume from Melanie's hands and said with dissatisfaction, May, we can't do that. It's very unprofessional. Carolyn said as she lowered her head and looked at the resume. It was a girl named Marissa Meyer. Although it was only a photo, she still looked very beautiful. Oh, she's only an undergraduate student in the computer science department at Stan University. She probably doesn't meet Eric's requirements. Melanie knew that this girl wouldn't allow her to mess around, but she still picked up the resume and stuffed it at the bottom of the pile of information. Then she said, Miss Haynes personally interviewed her. If she doesn't meet the requirements, do you think she can appear here? Carolyn didn't stop Melanie's little action this time. The two of them organized the information together, and the sound of a car engine could be heard outside. The two girls came out together. Eric was already looking at the mansion with great interest. This mansion, which covered an area of about 1 hectare, was bought by Eric recently. On the one hand, with the development of Firefly Electronics and other companies, he would frequently come to San Francisco in the future, and he needed a place to stay. On the other hand, Eric really didn't like to stay in hotels more and more. His current wealth was enough to support him to buy a house anywhere he was interested in, so he had this mansion. Melanie greeted Eric and took a few bodyguards to a small villa on the west side of the manor that was dedicated to the security personnel. After briefly introducing them, Melanie returned to the main villa and walked into the living room. She saw Carolyn coming out of the kitchen with a pot of coffee in her hand. Eric was sitting leisurely on the sofa with his legs crossed and flipping through a document. Eric looked up at Melanie and asked, Have you arranged it? Melanie nodded and glanced at the long table on the west side of the living room. The stack of resumes was still on it. She rolled her eyes and said as if nothing had happened, Eric, Los Angeles just sent the resumes of the applicants for the assistant office position. Do you want to take a look at them now? Eric took a cup of coffee from Carolyn and looked at where Melanie was pointing. He felt that it was more convenient to read the information at the long table, so he nodded, got up and walked over. Carolyn looked at the mischievous expression on Melanie's face and felt helpless. She didn't even put down the coffee pot she was holding and hurriedly followed after her. Eric sat down at the long table and was about to pick up the stack of resumes. His eyes inadvertently glanced at the fruit plate on the table. He felt that it was a little crooked, so he naturally reached out and pushed the fruit plate to the center of the table. Melanie noticed Eric's action and almost laughed out loud. Carolyn glared at Melanie and was about to say something to divert Eric's attention, but she noticed that his gaze fell on the small scratch. Eric stared at the scratch for a long time and said it didn't matter 100 times in his heart. In the end, he couldn't help but raise his head. Just as he was about to say something, he noticed that Melanie hadn't had time to retract her smile. Eric seemed to understand something and pointed at the scratch and asked, "Did you do it?" Melanie quickly shook her head. "Of course not, it was there originally. Didn't I order the furniture here to be replaced with new ones? How could there be a flaw?" Melanie couldn't help but feel guilty when she was stared at by Eric. She moved to Carolyn's side and continued to shake her head. "I don't know either." Eric looked at the place where he was sitting before and retracted his gaze. His gaze fell on the fruit platter and swept across the resume in front of him. "Then it must be you who did it. You dare to tease the boss. You have a lot of guts." Carolyn felt that Melanie was about to run away and quickly explained for her. "Eric, this scratch was originally there. I was the one who moved the fruit platter over." Eric roughly understood the ins and outs of the matter at this moment and said, "Okay then. Melanie, call someone to send a new table over. Also, the cost of the table will be deducted from your salary." Melanie opened her mouth and suddenly had the urge to cry in her heart. How could the furniture in this mansion be cheap? Just this table alone might cost a few months of her salary. Carolyn just happened to see the purchase budget of all the furniture in this mansion, and naturally knew that the price of this seemingly simple table imported from Germany was somewhat outrageous. Therefore, she pleaded for Melanie, "Eric, don't be like this, okay? This table is very expensive." Hearing the pleading in Carolyn's tone, Eric looked at Melanie, who wanted to cry but had no tears. He didn't scare her anymore and smiled. However, he didn't continue to sit there. He picked up the stack of documents and stood up, saying to Melanie, "Okay, I'll let you off this time. If you dare to tease me again, I'll definitely deduct a few months of your salary." Hearing this, Melanie heaved a huge sigh of relief. Although she had always complained about injustice for Carolyn in private, in reality, due to Eric's increasing wealth and power, Melanie was extremely respectful towards her boss from the depths of her heart. Compared to the simple-minded Carolyn, she possessed much more life experience. Therefore, she was more clear about what Eric's current power and status represented in this society. This time, Melanie couldn't help but start to reflect on herself. She swore that she wouldn't have such thoughts in the future. After all, in her heart, she actually cared more than Carolyn about this job with rich rewards and broad prospects. Chapter 919. Eric sat back on the sofa and didn't mention the table again. Melanie naturally wouldn't take the initiative to mention it either. She walked over and said, "Eric, it's already 6 o'clock. If there's nothing else, Carolyn and I will go to the hotel." "Why go to the hotel? Just stay here. We'll fly directly to New York tomorrow morning. There's no need to run back and forth." After Eric finished speaking, he didn't hear any response from the two women. He raised his head and saw Carolyn's blushing face. Melanie's expression was also a little unnatural. He couldn't help but laugh. Eric said again, "Don't worry, I won't harass you. However, if you two dare to attack me at night, I will resist." Melanie listened to Eric's joke and also chuckled. She walked over and squeezed with Carolyn on the single sofa. She hugged her petite body and said, "Eric, maybe someone wants to be harassed by you." "No way." As soon as Melanie's voice fell, Carolyn refuted without being pressed. Eric and Melanie laughed at the same time. Carolyn even buried her face in Melanie's arms. "Okay, don't bully Carolyn." After a moment, Eric took the initiative to withdraw his smile and said to Melanie, "Is the sales for the first week of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone out?" Last week, relying on the strong global distribution ability of the News Corporation's HarperCollins publishing house, the first book in the Harry Potter series, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, was released in the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, Australia, and other major English-speaking countries. In order to make this novel famous as soon as possible, the Firefly Group specially made a set of publicity plans according to the movie distribution model. A month before the novel was officially released, various aspects of the pre-promotion had already been launched. With the official release of the novel, the entire Firefly Group's television, movies, internet, magazines, newspapers, and other media channels spared no effort in promoting Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Melanie hugged Carolyn, who was still unable to restrain her shyness, before replying, "I just had a call with HarperCollins this afternoon. The results are still being calculated, and the detailed figures will only be out the day after tomorrow. However, from the initial feedback, the sales volume for the first week should not be less than 100,000 copies worldwide." Eric nodded in satisfaction, but he was not too excited. In his memory, the last book in the Harry Potter series, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, sold a terrifying 11 million copies worldwide within 24 hours. Compared to that, the current opening was nothing. Melanie was a little curious about Eric's calm performance. "Eric, the global sales in the first week exceeded 100,000 copies. With this kind of sales data, Harry Potter is enough to enter the bestseller list in most countries. Are you still not satisfied?" Eric shook his head and said, "Of course I am. However, I feel that this novel is still far from reaching its limit." "How many copies of this novel do you think we can sell?" "I can't guess. I'm not a prophet." Eric finished reading another resume and put it aside. He glanced at the name of the last resume and a smile appeared on his face. Melanie did not notice the subtle changes in Eric. After thinking for a while, she could not help but say, "Actually, there are many times when I feel that you are really like a prophet. Just like this Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. You seem to know in advance that it will be successful. That's why you have invested so much resources in promoting it." Eric looked at Marissa Meyer's resume and nodded. You should keep this matter to yourself. Don't spread it out. I will silence you." Melanie laughed and patted Carolyn's back, saying, "There is one more person here who already knows. What do you plan to do?" Carolyn finally sat up from Melanie's embrace. Her face was still red, and her eyes sparkled as she looked at Eric before dodging his gaze. Eric did not continue to tease Carolyn after Melanie's words. He finished reading Marissa Meyer's resume and said, "She will be the one. Call Kelly and ask her to arrange the employment procedures for this young lady named Marissa Meyer." It was only then that Melanie noticed that Eric was holding the resume that she had purposely stuffed at the bottom of the stack. She opened her mouth, but when she recalled the scratch on the table, she didn't dare to reveal any other strange expressions. She took the resume from Eric and thought for a moment before saying, "Eric, don't you have to interview her personally? She is a graduate of Stanford University. She might still be in Palo Alto." Stanford University was next to the wealthy district of Atherton. Eric only remembered it when he heard Melanie's reminder, so he nodded and said, "Call her and ask. If she is in Palo Alto, ask her to come over for breakfast tomorrow morning. If she is not, ask her to go to Los Angeles for work." As they were talking, Eric's phone rang. He picked up the phone and looked at the caller ID. He got up and said to Melanie, "I want to take a shower later. Help me prepare some hot water. Also, I will leave dinner to you. If you don't know how to cook, you can call for takeout." Looking at Eric walking to the backyard to pick up the phone, Melanie held Carolyn's face and looked at her. She said in a pitiful tone, "Sigh, I really have the life of a maid. He doesn't seem to want you to prepare the bath water for him." Carolyn blushed again, and took Melanie's hand away. She got up and pulled her, saying, "Let's go. Let's go together. I can help you." It was already evening on the west coast of the United States. In Brisbane on the east coast of Australia, it was not even 2 o'clock in the afternoon. On the road to the Brisbane airport, John Cole, who was driving his daughter to the airport, was very angry at this time. Or rather, since his daughter returned to Brisbane for the summer vacation, John Cole had been in an inexplicable anger for the past 3 months when he saw her wearing clothes, jewelry, and expensive daily necessities that he could not afford no matter what. Now he finally could not help but explode. He almost slapped the steering wheel of the white Toyota and shouted at the rearview mirror. "So, Eric Williams specially sent a plane to pick you up. Why did he send a plane to pick you up?" She was about to leave Australia, and Miranda Kerr finally did not want to put up with her father anymore. This summer vacation, the father and daughter had broken out in small conflicts more than once. So she said bluntly, "Eric likes me." If they were not on the highway, John Cole would have stepped on the brakes. How could he not have guessed these things? It was just that his daughter did not say it out loud, so he could not lose his temper. "Ha, do you know how old you are now? He is committing a crime. I want to sue him." "Go ahead and sue him. In any case, I will not stand on your side." Miranda Kerr did not show any weakness and retorted, "Who knows, maybe the United States federal court will not even accept your lawsuit." John Cole slapped the steering wheel again and shouted, "Don't forget, I am your father. If I don't allow it, don't even think about going anywhere. My legs are on my body. I can go wherever I want to go." Listening to the father and daughter arguing more and more fiercely, Thales Cole, who was sitting in the co-pilot seat, quickly patted his husband's shoulder to appease him. He looked at his daughter in the back seat and complained, "Miranda, since Mr. Williams sent a plane to pick you up, why didn't you say so earlier? Your father was afraid that you would be uncomfortable on the plane, and specially bought you a first-class ticket. If you refund the ticket now, the handling fee will be very expensive." Miranda Kerr originally just wanted to surprise her parents. Hearing her mother say this, she said indifferently, "Mom, it's only a few hundred Australian dollars. If it's gone, it's gone." John Cole snorted coldly. "That's right. If it's gone, it's gone. Anyway, today no, you will not be able to leave Brisbane in the future. We will go back later. Then you better break my legs first. Otherwise, if I run out, I will never come back." "Then I will break your legs. Do you think I won't dare?" Miranda Kerr noticed her father's fierce gaze in the rearview mirror and shrunk her neck. She pulled her mother's hand in the front seat and shook it. "Mom, look at him. John, don't scare the child like that." John Cole immediately vented his anger on his wife. "It's all your fault. You spoiled her. I didn't agree to let her go to Los Angeles. Now look at her. She is so young and she is already someone else's mistress." Miranda Kerr was dissatisfied again. "Hey, Eric is not married. Maybe I will become his wife in the future. Who would be willing to marry a crazy girl like you?" "Dad, I know. You are jealous." There was a moment of silence in the car. John Cole slapped the steering wheel hard again. He made up his mind that when they reached the airport, he must smash Eric Williams' so-called private plane to pieces, and then bring his daughter back. The Brisbane airport was next to the city by the sea. A few minutes later, the Toyota car stopped in the parking lot outside the airport. John Cole was determined to make a scene. He watched his wife take out his daughter's luggage from the trunk. He did not stop her, but he did not have any intention of helping either. Miranda Kerr had just taken out her Chanel girl's handbag when she saw a man and a woman walking towards them. When the other party got closer, Miranda finally saw that it was her assistant, Claire Graney. Back then, ICM had asked Claire to accompany her to the Bahamas for filming, and she had been acting as her personal assistant. After recognizing the other party, Miranda ran over enthusiastically. "Hi, Claire. Why are you here?" Claire Grain hugged Miranda and said with a smile, "Mr. Williams called me to come with him." "Oh, this is the captain of our plane, Mr. Paul Conies." "Hello, Mr. Conies." Miranda smiled sweetly and reached out her hand to the tall middle-aged man. The middle-aged man gently shook Miranda's small hand and nodded with a smile. "Just call me Paul, Miss Kerr." "Okay, Paul. Well, this is my mother, Thales Cole, and this is my father, John Cole." Miranda introduced them to each other enthusiastically. There was no trace of the argument she had with her father just now. This girl was actually very smart. If her father really did not let her leave Brisbane today, it would definitely be very troublesome. Therefore, according to her father's personality, she decisively changed her strategy. Sure enough, when Paul Cones and Claire Graney extended their hands to John Cole politely and respectfully, John Cole, who was about to blow his top, immediately calmed down. He couldn't help but shake hands with them. After exchanging greetings, Paul Coney said to Miranda, "So, Miss Kerr, the plane is ready. Shall we go?" Hearing Paul Coney's words, John Cole immediately reacted. Just as he was about to say something, Miranda, who noticed the expression on her father's face, spoke first. "Paul, can we take off a little later? I want to take my parents to see the plane." Paul Coney still had a faint smile on his face. He nodded and said, "Of course, Mr. Cole. Miss Cole, please come with me." Seeing Claire take the initiative to take Miranda's suitcase from her hands, Thales Cole was worried that her husband would do something out of line. She stepped forward and held his arm, whispering, "Let's go, John. Don't make a fool of yourself." John Cole's impulse to smash the plane had dissipated by a lot. He pretended to helplessly glare at his wife before reluctantly walking forward. Through the VIP channel, coupled with the fact that it was a private plane, the security check process was much simpler. A few minutes later, everyone entered the airport. John Cole looked at the huge figure of the Boeing 767 in front of him, and then glanced around. The Brisbane airport was not big. Among the more than 10 planes parked around, only 2 or 3 planes were larger than this behemoth that was close to 50 meters in length. Miranda Kerr's eyes shone brightly. Like an excited little bird, she pulled her mother up the gangway and quickly disappeared from the cabin. The captain, Paul Coneys, saw that John Cole did not follow, so he took the initiative to stay and politely introduced the other crew members to John Cole. John Cole mechanically shook hands with everyone. In the end, he could not help but ask, "Paul, this plane is here to pick up Miranda?" As an ordinary middle-class person, John Cole knew that most private planes were small planes that were a few meters or more than 10 meters long. It was the first time he saw a Boeing that was only 1 grade smaller than the largest wide-body plane as a private plane. He also did not think that this kind of thing would be related to his daughter. Paul Coney still politely nodded and said, "Yes, John, is there a problem?" John Cole lowered his voice a little guiltily. "A flight from Los Angeles like this probably costs a lot, right? If it's a single rental, a round trip from Los Angeles costs $500,000 US. John Cole suddenly felt a sense of powerlessness in his heart. His body even involuntarily shrank a little. $500,000 US. That was nearly 700,000 Australian dollars. He had never seen so much money in his life. The thought of stopping his daughter from going to Los Angeles had completely disappeared without a trace. John Cole could not help but think that it would be great if the 500,000 US could be turned into cash. His family could buy a house, a good car, and even a yacht. Now it was just a trip to Los Angeles. What a waste. This prodigal daughter. Chapter 920. In the early morning in Atherton, although the dense trees on both sides of the road were abnormally active, it still gave people a sense of tranquility. Marissa Meyer parked the car on the side of the road, confirmed the address, and pushed the door open to get out. She woke up before 5 o'clock today, and spent more than an hour carefully preparing for this morning's meeting. Through this period of understanding, she knew that Eric Williams was a very freewheeling person in many aspects. Since the other party called her to come over for breakfast, Marissa Meyer was already certain in her heart that she probably got the job. This month's efforts were not in vain. A month ago, she learned that Eric Williams' assistant office needed to recruit a new assistant, and she immediately had an idea. Since high school, she had planned her future. At the beginning, she gave up law school, which her parents were more optimistic about, and stubbornly chose computer science. In addition to her own interests, she also noticed the vast prospects of the rapid development of the IT industry. Originally, she did not plan to enter the workplace in advance. Although she received a bachelor's degree in computer science from a well-known federal university like Stanford University, she knew that now that she entered the workplace, she could only start from a basic programmer. Even if she was lucky, it would probably take 8 to 10 years before she could become a high-level company executive. But if she could get a position in Eric Williams' assistant office, everything would be different. 2 months ago, she saw from the Yahoo portal that Eric Williams' former assistant, Peter Ritchie, was the deputy general manager of the advertising and marketing department of FFM TV station. Before that, another former assistant of Eric Williams, Alan Fissman, was now the vice president of ABC Group. Judging from these two examples, as long as she could enter Eric Williams' assistant office and get the attention of the other party, then in a few years, she would definitely be able to easily get a middle management position in a company with the Firefly system. At the same time, her promotion speed would definitely be faster than other managers. In this regard, even if she continued to get a master's degree from Stanford University, and then started from a higher starting point as a senior engineer, to get the same position was not achievable in 3 to 5 years. Therefore, although the recruitment notice required candidates to have a master's degree or above, Marissa Meyer still decided to give it a try. Not only did she carefully prepare her own resume, but she also got handwritten recommendation letters from several well-known professors at Stanford University. However, although she was full of confidence, when she sent out her resume for the first time, because her education did not meet the requirements, she quickly received a rejection call. She was not discouraged, and after some effort, a week later, through a professor at the school, she contacted Peter Ritchie, who happened to be the professor's favorite student. Under the professor's recommendation, Peter Ritchie promised to help her submit her resume to the head of Eric Williams' assistant office, Kelly Haynes. Perhaps moved by her persistence, Kelly Haynes gave her an opportunity for an interview. She also successfully passed the interview and entered the final round of candidates. As the only undergraduate on the candidate list, plus some guesses about Eric Williams' personality, she believed that she would definitely be able to attract the attention of the other party. Reality did not let her down. The only thing that made her hesitate was that Eric Williams was known to be a playboy. She was still very confident in her appearance. If the other party asked her to go on a date, she did not know whether she should agree or refuse, or whether she should properly catch the other party's appetite. Forget it, I'll think about it when the time comes. Looking down at her clothes again, because the other party invited her to have breakfast together, Marissa Meyer did not dress too formally. She wore a camel-colored close-fitting woolen sweater, a pair of white trousers, and a pair of black stilettos on her feet. She looked capable, but there was no lack of sexiness. Looking up at the mansion in front of her, Marissa Meyer's eyes were filled with envy. She could not help but begin to calculate in her heart, if she wanted to buy this mansion, what kind of position would she need to reach? Thinking of this, she reached out and pressed the doorbell. A moment later, she saw a very petite girl turn out of the mansion's small path and walk to the front door. This was a delicate doll-like girl, only a little more than 1.5 meters in height. She also wore a woolen sweater and casual trousers, but the color was different. Marissa Meyer was just glad that the two of them did not wear the same clothes, but her face suddenly became a little uncomfortable. This girl should definitely not be an adult. She looked at most 13 or 14 years old. Marissa Meyer did not want to touch on these rich people's private matters. "Hello, Miss Meyer. Eric is already waiting for you." Carolyn opened the door to let Marissa Meyer in, and politely greeted her. Noticing the unnatural expression on Marissa Meyer's face, Carolyn immediately felt a little embarrassed. This was not the first time she had encountered such a situation, so she could easily guess Marissa Meyer's thoughts. Not wanting others to misunderstand Eric, Carolyn took the initiative to introduce herself. "I am Eric's assistant, Carolyn Wilson." The doubts in Marissa Meyer's heart did not dissipate, but she realized that she had lost her composure. She quickly put away her expression and smiled as she shook hands with Carolyn. "Hello, Miss Wilson. Just call me Carolyn. Please come with me. Breakfast will be ready soon. You can chat with Eric first." Carolyn led Meyer into the courtyard. The two of them entered the villa together, and Carolyn brought Marissa Meyer to the entrance of the gym. "Eric, Miss Meyer is here." Marissa Meyer saw a man wearing a sports singlet and shorts on the treadmill diagonally opposite them. She gently waved her hand. Carolyn gestured for her to enter. "Please, Miss Meyer." Marissa Meyer placed her bag on the table at the entrance and walked into the spacious gym. She turned her head to look at Carolyn, who nodded at her with a smile and turned to leave. Marissa Meyer walked up to Eric alone. When she thought of the achievements of the man in front of her that others might not be able to achieve in their lifetime, She could not help but feel restrained. However, she did not forget that this was actually an interview. She quickly thought about what kind of tricky questions the other party might ask. Well, he might make her stand beside him for 10 minutes to test her patience. When she thought of this possibility, Marissa Meyer could not help but straighten her back and relax her expression. The corners of her mouth curled up into a smile to make herself appear more confident. Eric was obviously not a strict interviewer. When he noticed Meyer walking up to him, he nodded at her and pressed the button in front of him a few times. The treadmill slowly came to a stop. Marissa Meyer saw Eric coming down from the treadmill, drenched in sweat. She glanced at the towel on the shelf next to him, and naturally reached out to take it and handed it to him. "Thank you." Eric took the towel and thanked her. He wiped the sweat off his face and looked at the woman in front of him at the same time. Eric did not have much information about Marissa Meyer in his original memory. He only knew that she had two identities: a female executive at Google and the CEO of Yahoo. But that was enough. In this world dominated by men, as a woman who could become the head of a top 500 company in the world, her ability was absolutely outstanding. She was definitely more than enough to be his office assistant. After reading Marissa Meyer's resume yesterday, Eric knew more about her. She was a female top student who had been the top student since she was a child. Kelly's evaluation of Marissa Meyer in the interview was also very high. She was calm, persistent, meticulous, and good at communicating. While she was also very controlling and aggressive, these two characteristics could not be considered as shortcomings. After simply wiping his sweat, Eric hung the towel around his neck and nodded at Meyer, who was looking at him without avoiding his eyes. "You are very beautiful." Meyer was originally waiting for Eric's possible questions. When she saw him looking at her, she was somewhat surprised. But she did not hesitate and responded with a smile. "Thank you for your compliment, Mr. Williams." Although she said this, Meyer was a little disappointed. He did not hire her just for her appearance, right? This was not a good thing. She did not want to be treated as a vase like the petite girl just now. She did not know much about Carolyn, although she was often described as having a Barbie doll face. She did not think that the petite girl who looked like a doll had any ability to work. But in the blink of an eye, she made up her mind. In any case, she would get this job first. If Eric Williams did not pay attention to her talent, she could still change jobs. Working as an assistant in Eric Williams' office would be a very good experience. She would not have to worry about not being able to find a good job. Eric praised Meyer and walked out of the gym. Meyer took the initiative to follow him. When they came to the living room, Eric said to Meyer, "Sit for a while. I will go take a shower." Marissa Meyer nodded and watched Eric go up the stairs to the second floor. She went to the sofa and sat down, curiously looking at the villa. Her mind calmed down. Not far away, the conversation in the kitchen fell into her ears. She did not hear anything clearly and was not too curious. She began to think about Eric's actions just now. This guy who was about to become her boss was not harsh, not tricky, and was polite. Although most people would behave like this when they first met, she was still very confident that she could distinguish whether a person's words and actions were pretentious or genuine. Therefore, he should be easy to get along with. But he directly praised her for being beautiful. He was definitely a playboy. But his body was really good. She felt that she was a little wrong and quickly put away her thoughts. Carolyn came out of the kitchen again. Meyer took the initiative to stand up and pointed in the direction of the kitchen. "Carolyn, is there anything I can help you with?" "Thank you, but breakfast is ready." Carolyn looked around and asked, "Where is Eric?" Marissa Meyer pointed to the stairs. "He finished exercising and went to take a shower." "Oh, then let's go to the dining room first. I will introduce you to Melanie. She is also Eric's assistant." Eric took a simple shower, changed his clothes, and went downstairs. In the dining room, the three girls were already chatting enthusiastically. "What are you talking about?" Eric asked curiously as he sat down at the table with a smile. "Nothing." Carolyn, who was closest to Eric, shook her head and stood up together with Melanie. One went to the kitchen to bring breakfast, while the other placed today's newspaper in front of Eric. Marissa Meyer was still surprised when she heard that Carolyn and Melanie were both graduates of Harvard Business School. Seeing that they had become two little maids in the blink of an eye, she also quickly stood up. Seeing that Eric's eyes fell on the newspaper and didn't say anything, she consciously followed Melanie to the kitchen to help bring breakfast. Carrying a small basket of bread, she followed Melanie out. Meyer saw that she and Carolyn stood on both sides of Eric, one on the left and one on the right, one on the right. One was pouring milk, while the other was poking fried eggs. They seemed to have a tacit understanding. She suddenly began to feel nervous in her heart. She wouldn't have to do these trivial things in the future, right? Although she thought so in her heart, she felt that she had already involuntarily moved closer. She picked up the bread and put a piece of bread in front of Eric's plate. She also asked, "Mr. Williams, is one enough?" Eric had just opened the San Francisco Chronicle in his hand. When he heard Meyer's question, he looked up at both sides and said, "You all sit down, I can do it myself." Melanie put a fried egg on Eric's plate. When she heard Eric's words, she couldn't help but curse in her heart. "Hypocritical boss, we have already done it, and you want to do it yourself. You are too insincere." Of course, she only dared to think so. Looking at Carolyn's satisfied little face when she was busy with these things, she suddenly felt even more resentful. Eric quickly browsed through the San Francisco Chronicle, but he didn't find any important news. He put the newspaper aside and took a sip of milk. He looked at Meyer and said, "I saw on your resume yesterday that you have already received a postgraduate admission letter in the field of artificial intelligence." Except for the details just now, the atmosphere in the restaurant was very relaxed. Marissa Meyer didn't act too formal and nodded naturally, "Yes." "Then finish it." Eric nodded and said. When he noticed the disappointment in Meyer's eyes, he smiled and added, "I mean, while taking care of this job, I hope you can get a master's degree at the same time. Is there a problem?" Most American universities accepted on-the-job postgraduate students. Although Marissa Meyer didn't know much about Stan's information in this regard, when she heard that she had received the job of assistant in Eric's office, she nodded without hesitation and said, "No problem, but Mr. Williams, I think I am now qualified for the upcoming job. Is there a need to continue to study as a postgraduate?" Chapter 9:21. Eric nodded and said, "If it's other majors, it may not be necessary, but in the field of artificial intelligence, I still hope you can accumulate more knowledge in this area." Speaking of artificial intelligence, perhaps most people's first thought was robots. But this was not the case. Artificial intelligence was just a branch of computer science. Among them, internet search engines happened to be a practical application of artificial intelligence that was closely related to the lives of ordinary people. In recent years, under Eric's special attention, Yahoo had not given up the development of more intelligent search engine technology. Because the search engine carried by the Yahoo portal itself was very good, pure search engine companies such as InfoSeek that should have appeared in the original spacetime did not appear. Even the AOL portal was embedded with the Yahoo search engine. In the plan after 2000, Eric would gradually promote Yahoo from a comprehensive portal to a search engine service provider. Now, since Marissa Meyer took the initiative to come to his door, Eric naturally would not let her stay in his assistant's office. The best place for her in the future was naturally Yahoo. The IT industry was very different from the media industry. The media industry valued work experience and creativity more. Even if a person did not go to college, they could still become a senior executive of a large media group. But in the IT industry, if you did not have enough knowledge, it was basically impossible to be a senior executive of a Silicon Valley technology company. Eric briefly explained the reason for letting her continue to be a graduate student, and Marissa Meyer had no objections. However, after eating breakfast and leaving Eric's mansion in Atherton, Marissa Meyer felt that everything she experienced this morning was a bit strange. Thinking back carefully, throughout the whole process, Eric gave her the feeling that he knew her. She did not feel any sense of strangeness from Eric. Instead, she felt a bit of inexplicable familiarity. But she was 100% sure that she had never seen him before. And it was unlikely that Eric had seen her before. Thinking about it carefully, Marissa Meyer could only count it as the unique charisma of a person like Eric Williams. He was able to create such a huge economic empire at such a young age, so he naturally had something different from ordinary people. Eric had ordered the plane to pick up Miranda in Brisbane yesterday to divert to San Francisco, so that it would be convenient for him to fly directly to New York. After breakfast, he received a call saying that the Boeing 767 would land at the San Jose International Airport at 8:30 a.m. It was almost time, so he left Atherton with the two women and his bodyguard and directly rushed to the airport. During the 14-hour nonstop flight from Brisbane to San Francisco, Miranda was in a state of excitement. After the plane took off from Brisbane, Miranda kept walking around the plane like a kitten declaring its territory. She visited every place, including the screening room, the conference room, the study room, the bathroom, the living room, the bar, until she secretly drank a small glass of very strong whiskey and felt sleepy. The girl went into the bedroom of the presidential suite with a red face and fell asleep. The plane landed on the runway of the San Jose International Airport with slight bumps. Miranda's assistant, Claire, knocked on the door several times but did not get a response. She worriedly barged in and saw the girl who was still sleeping soundly on the big bed. Eric had planned to send Miranda back to Los Angeles and enter the airport, but after hearing Claire's report, he had to get on the plane first, intending to wake this lazy cat up. Miranda felt someone patting her and woke up in a daze. When she saw that it was Eric, she smiled sweetly and hugged him. Eric looked at the girl who was only wearing a singlet and hot pants. She kicked off the blanket and wrapped her two long legs around him like a koala. He smiled and patted her little butt saying, "Get up, everyone is looking at you." Miranda looked around and saw Claire standing behind Eric, holding her clothes. However, there were two young women standing at the door. The girl who was as petite as a doll immediately made her feel a sense of crisis. She pointed at Carolyn and Melanie asking, "Eric, who are they?" Eric smiled and introduced, "Carolyn and Melanie, they are my new assistants." Miranda noticed that when Carolyn looked over, there was a faint resentment on her doll-like face. She felt a sense of superiority in her heart. She looked at Carolyn and said, "Carolyn, I'm thirsty. Can you get me a glass of water?" Carolyn stared blankly for a moment, the resentment on her face becoming even more apparent. She pursed her thin lips, her eyes sparkling as she turned towards Eric. Eric had brought Carolyn by his side, so that she could slowly see his life and gradually dispel her feelings for him. At this moment, Eric noticed the resentment and disappointment on her little face. He immediately felt some heartache. Without the slightest hesitation, he slapped Miranda's butt again. He deliberately increased the strength and said, "If you want to drink water, get Claire to pour it for you. In the future, you are not allowed to order my assistants around." The few people in the bedroom could clearly feel the change in Eric's mood. Claire did not wait for Eric's instructions, and put down the clothes in her hands, and left the bedroom. Miranda was even more dissatisfied with Carolyn and Melanie in her heart. However, a pitiful expression appeared on her face. "Eric, I'm sorry. I won't dare to do it again. You hit me so hard." Eric ignored the girl's expression and turned to the two girls at the door saying, "Carolyn, Melanie, you two go and rest. You don't need to come over." Melanie nodded, reached out to pull Carolyn, and turned to leave. Eric retracted his gaze and said to Miranda, "Okay, change your clothes. The weather in California is starting to get cold. Be careful not to catch a cold. I asked Carter to prepare a car to send you back to Los Angeles." Miranda immediately hugged Eric's waist coquettishly. "Eric, school will start in a week. Can I go to New York with you? I want to go to Fashion Week." "I'm going for work. I don't have time to take care of you," Eric said as he took the girl's clothes from the table. "I don't need you to take care of me. I can stay at Giselle's place. I'll come back after I'm done with Fashion Week." Miranda didn't take the clothes as she pleaded. She didn't forget to rub her slender body against Eric's body. Unable to resist the girl's pleading, Eric could only nod and agree. He took the glass of water from Claire, who came back, and handed it to Miranda. He instructed Claire to get the crew ready to take off. Then he asked Miranda, who was in his arms, "Are you close to Giselle?" Miranda drank a few mouthfuls of water, and casually put the glass on the table next to her. She blinked her eyes shrewdly and said, "Not close. But if you ask, they definitely can't refuse, right?" "Oh, aren't you afraid of asking for a snub?" "I'm not afraid. If they don't treat me well, I'll complain to you." Miranda was very fearless. After saying that, she suddenly blinked her eyelashes and leaned over. "Eric, can I use this plane often in the future?" Eric pressed down on the girl's restless waist, but his big hand couldn't help but slowly stroke down. He shook his head and smiled. "That won't do. This plane is for everyone's work. We can't let you mess around. In a few years, when the few planes I bought are delivered, you can use it as you wish." Miranda cheered excitedly and leaned over to kiss Eric's face. She even reached down and unbuttoned her little hot pants. She leaned over and whispered into his ear, "Eric, touch it. Is my skin better?" The Boeing 767 was refueled at the San Jose International Airport. Soon it took off again and rushed to New York. After the plane stabilized in the air, Melanie unfastened her seat belt in the lounge located in the middle of the plane. Looking towards Carolyn, who still had a somewhat gloomy expression on her face, she said, "Okay, Carolyn. Now you understand, right? He's a bastard. It's not worth it to feel sad over a fellow like him." "No, I'm not sad." Carolyn shook her head. Her eyes were still a little blank. She said, I just. Melanie simply pulled Carolyn up and said, "Let's go. I just saw a bar on the plane. Let's go and have a drink." Carolyn obediently followed Melanie and stood up. She muttered, Don't tell me you don't understand why boss is interested in other girls and is indifferent towards you?" Carolyn's face immediately turned red. However, she lowered her little head and did not refute. Melanie brought Carolyn to the bar. She did not hold back and picked out a bottle of expensive red wine from the wine cabinet. She opened it and sat down beside the bar counter. Carolyn said, "However, to be honest, he's really very good to you. Even a blind person can see that. Just now, that little bitch wanted to order you around, but was immediately stopped by him." Carolyn wrinkled her brows and said, "Melanie, don't call others that. It's very impolite." Melanie placed 2 wine glasses in front of the two and said, "Okay, let's change the way we call each other. How about the little beach? The beach by the sea?" Carolyn could not help but pat Melanie's arm and said, "Isn't that the same?" Melanie did not mind Carolyn's little actions at all. She smiled and said, "Okay, let's go back to the previous topic. Why is he so good to you, but has no interest in men and women?" Carolyn raised her little face, waiting for Melanie to continue speaking. Melanie kept her in suspense. She raised the wine glass and took a sip of red wine. Only then did she faintly say, "According to my analysis, there are 2 possible reasons." First, Melanie raised a finger and said, "He's gay." Carolyn immediately shook her head. "That's not the case." Melanie also smiled. She extended her hand and pinched Carolyn's little chin. She said, "Of course I know that. If Eric Williams is gay, then there are no normal men in this world. Therefore, there is only the second possibility." "Oh." Melanie put up a second finger and said with certainty, "He treats you as his daughter." Carolyn immediately opened her eyes wide. Her face was as red as the red wine in front of them. How is that possible?" Melanie, on the other hand, was very certain of her own opinion. She analyzed, "Hey, after being together for so long, you must know better than me that Eric's mental age is much more mature than his physical age. Sometimes he's just like an old man. Old men like little girls. Your personality is so pure, and you're so small. Oh, you're also very smart and obedient. You're basically in line with the image of a perfect daughter in an old man's heart." Carolyn blinked her eyes and stared blankly for a moment. Only then did she retort, "He has a daughter called Hawaii. This I know. There's no rule that says that a father can only have one daughter." Melanie immediately shook her head. She also knew that Eric already had a son and a daughter. This was not a secret in the circle. However, in the blink of an eye, Melanie caught a crucial piece of information from Carolyn's words. "That's Hawaii. Is that his daughter's name?" Carolyn nodded. Eric had mentioned it to her by chance before. It was the first time Melanie had heard the name of Eric's daughter. After pondering for a while, she couldn't help but laugh. What a reckless guy. He actually gave his daughter such a strange name. Hee hee, how nice it would be to call her Carolyn. Carolyn's face, which had just recovered a little, suddenly turned red again. She got up and walked out of the bar. She said, I don't want to listen to your nonsense. More than 4 hours later, the Boeing 767 arrived at the East Coast. However, it did not land at JFK International Airport, which was close to the center of New York. Instead, it landed at MacArthur Airport in the middle of Long Island. It was very close to East Hampton. When he returned to New York, he definitely had to stay with his woman and child for a few days. When the plane landed, it was drizzling in Long Island. The East Coast was not like California where it was spring all year round. It was already autumn, and the rainy days were a little cooler. I have already called Giselle. You can go directly to their residence on Madison Avenue. I will go to Manhattan in 2 days. Eric stood next to a car that had come to pick him up. He said a few words to Miranda and sent her and the assistant named Claire to the same car. After the girl left, Eric turned to Carolyn and Melanie beside him. Carolyn looked at him with a strange expression. Eric thought that she was still bothered by the matter between him and Miranda, so he didn't take it to heart. However, he noticed that Carolyn was still only wearing a thin, close-fitting woolen sweater. He asked with concern, Where's your coat? It's a little cold here. Put it on. Carolyn shook her head subconsciously and took a step back. She avoided Eric's gaze and said, I'm not cold. Melanie, who was next to her, suddenly showed a proud smile. See, I was right. Then get in the car first. Eric had asked the ABC headquarters to send 3 cars over in advance. He reached out and opened the door of another black Mercedes-Benz and said to Carolyn. Carolyn hesitated for a moment, but she still got into the car obediently. However, she still avoided Eric's gaze. Eric took a bunch of keys from the driver sent by ABC and handed it to Melanie. This is the key to my residence on 6th Avenue. You and Carolyn can live there first. Consider it as a work benefit. You don't have to work these 2 days. You can take her around Manhattan. Melanie had no intention of being courteous with Eric. Taking the keys from his hands, she said, Thank you, Eric. Okay. She paused for a moment before adding, I'll take good care of Carolyn. Eric naturally couldn't know what the 2 girls were thinking. Watching them leave in the car, he sighed slightly. However, he thought that it was good to let Carolyn slowly let go of her feelings for him. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.